Good evening, councillors, officers, members of the public. I am Councillor Clive English, the chairman of this planning committee, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this remote adjourned meeting of the committee. The meeting will be broadcast live and recorded for playback on the council's YouTube channel, and this will include the instant messaging. Will anyone else be recording the proceedings? I ask so that people at the meeting will know if this is happening and not in order to stop it. Any declarations? In that case, I assume only the council's service is recording. I will now explain how the meeting will be conducted this evening. My role as chairman will continue. However, the responsibility for managing the meeting has been temporarily assigned to the Democratic and Electoral Services Manager, who I will refer to as the facilitator. This officer will not steer the debate, but will assist in implementing the remote meeting protocols. A Democratic Services Officer is with us as well to produce the minutes and to provide procedural advice as required. Instead of public speaking, members of the public have been invited to submit written statements which will be read out by me as chairman, or videos which will be played in the appropriate speaker slot. We have a number of statements and videos this evening. I will provide further explanations as we proceed through the agenda, but members are reminded that instant messaging will be visible to those viewing the meeting and should only be used by members to indicate they wish to speak or to propose and second a motion or amendment. I will now ask the facilitator to take the attendance register by reading out the list of committee members in alphabetical order. Members should confirm their attendance by answering present. Mr. O'Connell.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. Councillor Atkinson.
Present.
Councillor Brindle.
Present.
Councillor Chapel-Tay. Councillor Chapel-Tay. I'll come back.
Right.
Councillor Chapel-Tay had microphone issues last night, so.
Yeah, she was here a minute ago, but there we go.
Councillor English.
Present.
We have apologies for Councillor Eaves. Councillor Harwood.
Present.
Councillor Kimments.
Present.
Councillor Chapel-Tay has indicated her presence in the instant messaging.
Yes, I've just seen that. Thank you, Mr. O'Connell.
Councillor Munford.
Present.
We have apologies for Councillor Parfitt-Reid. Councillor Perry.
Present.
Councillor Spooner.
Present.
Councillor Vizard.
Present.
Councillor Wilby. Councillor Wilby.
Present.
Thank you. And I'm aware that Councillors Bryce and Young will be substituting. So Councillor Bryce.
Present.
Thank you. And Councillor Young.
Present.
Okay, can members mute because we're getting feedback again. Now, I will now ask the facilitator to read out the list of officers present and which items they will be presenting this evening.
Thank you, Chairman. We have Rob Jarman, Head of Planning and Development, James Bailey, Development Manager for items 11, 12 and 13, Austin Mackey, Major Projects Manager, item 10, Marion Geary, Principal Planning Officer for item 9, Brendan Wright from KCC Highways, Russell Fitzpatrick as a legal representative, myself, Ryan O'Connell, the Democratic Electoral Services Manager as facilitator, and Debbie Snook, the Democratic Services Officer and Clerk for the committee. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. We proceed to the main agenda of the evening. Item 1, apologies. If I can ask Mr. O'Connell to read out the list of apologies received.
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillors Eaves and Parfitt-Reid.
Are there any other apologies? Just those two. Yes, right. Thank you. Can I ask Mr. O'Connell to indicate if there are any substitute members?
Yes, so we have Councillor Bryce, who I understand is substituting for Councillor Parfitt-Reid, and Councillor Young, who is substituting for Councillor Eaves.
Thank you very much indeed. And continuing with you, Mr. O'Connell, could you read out the names of visiting members along with the items they have indicated they wish to speak to?
For item 9, we have Councillor Hinder, who is here as a representative of Boxley Parish Council and the ward member. And for item 11, we have Councillor Burton. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Agenda item 4, items withdrawn from the agenda. I do not believe there are any items to be withdrawn this evening, so we'll be proceeding with the agenda as circulated. Item 5, urgent items. It is my intention to take the urgent update reports in relation to agenda items 9, 10 and 11, together with any verbal updates as urgent items as they continue further information relating to the applications to be considered at this meeting. Is it agreed I take those urgent updates? I will assume yes if I don't see any indications in the instant messaging in the next few seconds. In that case, we are taking those urgent items. Item 6, disclosures by members and officers.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Councillor Tony Harwood, I need to declare in relation to item 9, Gibraltar Farm at Hempstead, that I am a member of Boxley Parish Council, but I took no part in any discussion about this application. I therefore intend to speak and vote.
Are there any other disclosures?
Yes, I also, it's Anne Brindle here.
Thank
I am also a member of Boxley Parish Council. I have been party to various discussions with regard to agenda item 9. I will therefore not take part in any of the discussions, neither will I vote.
Thank you very much indeed. Any other disclosures? No, in that case, I shall move on to item 7, disclosures of lobbying. I will ask the facilitator to ask members of the committee and substitute members in alphabetical order if they have any disclosures of lobbying. They must answer either yes or no and specify the agenda item or items they have been lobbied on. Mr. O'Connell, if you take the committee in order.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Atkinson.
Items 9 and 11.
Thank you. Councillor Bryce.
9 and 11.
Thank you. Councillor Brindle.
9, 10 and 11.
Thank you. Councillor Chapel-Tay.
All items, namely 9 to 12.
Thank you. Councillor English.
Yes, the same, 9 through to 12.
Councillor Harwood.
9, 10, 11 and 12.
Councillor Kimmins.
9, 10, 11 and 12.
Councillor Munford.
9, 10 and 11.
Councillor Perry.
9, 10 and 11.
Thank you. Councillor Spooner.
9, 10 and 11.
Thank you. Councillor Vizard.
9, 10 and 11.
Councillor Wilby.
9, 10, 11 and 12.
And Councillor Young.
9, 10 and 11.
That concludes the lobbying. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. We move on to item 8 to consider whether any items should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. I'm not aware of any exempt information that might arise this evening. Therefore, I move that the items on the agenda be taken in public as proposed, and we will assume that that is agreed unless I see any indications to the contrary in the IM. No, those items will be taken in public. Moves us on to the committee reports for this evening. I'll read out the agenda item and refer to the officer who will be duly presenting the report. After the report has been introduced, I will call out the names of the people who have submitted written statements to be read out of the meeting or videos to be played in the appropriate speaker slot. The statements will be read out by me as chairman, although I'm reading one of them in my role as a ward member. I will then ask any visiting members for the item to make their contributions. Each member will be called by name. I will then advise members of the list I have received by IM of those members wishing to speak, and then ask if there are any other members who wish to speak. And at appropriate points after members have spoken or asked questions, I will invite the officer to respond. After the list of members wishing to speak has been exhausted, I will ask if any members wish to come back with more questions or comments. If a member wishes to propose a new motion or amend the current one, I will ask for a seconder, with members going for instant messaging or indicating verbally, and the first one to signal will be the seconder. The seconder will be asked at that point if they wish to speak or reserve their right. At the end of the debate, any amendments having been voted on, I will sum up, and the original motion or substantive motion as amended will be put to the vote. I will ask the facilitator to go through the list of members in alphabetical order and ask them for their vote, which would be for, against, or abstain. By voting, the member will be confirming that they have been present for the agenda item they have indicated they wish to speak on. That they have wished to vote on. If there is no response, it will be assumed that the member is not present. I will have a second or casting vote regardless of whether I have used my first vote. The Democratic Services Officer will be asked to confirm the result of the vote, and I will announce the decision. Unless requested by 3 members of the committee by instant messaging or verbally during the debate, the names of those voting for and against the motion or amendment or abstaining from voting will not be entered in the minutes. If a report is for information only and the recommendation has been moved and seconded, I will ask if that is agreed, and if there is no dissent, a vote will not be taken. A named vote will not be taken. At the end of each item, I will ask for a brief pause where appropriate, while those who wish to do so leave the meeting. So that brings us on to very shortly agenda item 9, planning applications, and we'll be calling upon Miss Marion Geary, Principal Planning Officer, to introduce the report. I look forward to seeing the report shortly. Are you with us, Marion?
I am. Just
good.
trying
Excellent.
To share my
Excellent.
desktop.
Excellent.
As I tried to practice earlier.
Oh, brilliant.
Is it there? Good.
Yep, absolutely.
And can everybody hear me?
Perfectly, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Just down to the next case. Members will be aware of the urgent update circulated earlier in the week, which suggests amendments conditions 8, 9 and 18, and 3 amendments to the representations be made to Medway Council on the consultation application. As a verbal update, since that was published, Medway Council have been assessing the proposed works to byway RC9 in Lordswood, and further detailed drawings have been submitted, which necessitates an amendment to condition 6, which will require the cycleway footway link on land outside the ownership of the applicant to be completed before there is any development within the borough. In addition, some further objections have been received, but no more planning matters have been raised that have not already been fully assessed in the main report and in the urgent update. This is a cross-boundary application consisting of the main application and also a consultation from Medway Council. This is a type of case where the developer needs planning permission from both Medway Council and Maidstone Borough Council in order to proceed. The current extent of a planning permission granted by Medway Council as local planning authority has vehicular access towards Lordswood, but in its role as landowner, Medway Council has refused to allow access. Hence, this alternative scheme has been submitted. Just to go through the slides. This is the aerial of the site, and this black line here marks the borough boundary. There's a sort of non-arbitrary line across an arable field. It comes along Ham Lane on the northern side of Ham Lane, then comes down here on Lidsing Lane, and then crosses Lidsing Lane again. So basically Hempstead Road, most of Lidsing Road, and most of Ham Lane are in the borough of Medway, and only this small area here is in the borough of Maidstone. This is just an area of Westfield Sole Road where there are planning to be some passing bay improvements, which aren't in the application as such, but have been referred to in the Section 106 agreement. Just some photographs of the site. This is the junction of Ham Lane with Lidsing Road. just Ham Lane here, and then this is the main road here. This is a view across the site. As you can see, it's an arable field in intensive arable production. There's no hedgerows around the edge of the field. It's this sort of very low bund arrangement. This is a view from Hempstead Road, looking out across the same field where the development's planning to be. This is looking on the side of Lisding Road as it turns around the corner and the existing junction with Hempstead Road. And it's just a bit further on, looking down towards carrying on down the Lisding Road. This is a plan which shows the extent of the works in the two different districts. Essentially, it's just a small area here, which is in the Maidstone area. I'll give some more detail on that on the next slide. So effectively, the area within Maidstone is this area here. So effectively, this is Ham Lane, which will be stopped up. Ham Lane will be diverted along this alignment here, entering a new junction and a new alignment of Lisding Lane. There's also be a cycleway footway going all virtually parallel to that new road. And then there's be an alteration of the Hempstead Road junction as well. Both of these junctions will have much better visibility than existing, and there'll be extra lanes created for waiting traffic so that the free flow of traffic is improved as well. Not particularly clear drawing, but this is effectively illustrative works to Westfield Soul Road, where some existing passing places could be more formalised into passing bays, just to deal with some bottlenecks that currently exists for traffic that uses that lane to access the local area. This is the landscape master plan. As you can see, the scheme is an outline, but effectively, these are the areas of the housing, and it's indicated that the boundary will be screened by trees along this buffer here. The new link road will also be screened by trees, and there'll be some new tree planting indicatively there as well. This is just a map that shows various public rights of way continuing through the development that would obviously need to continue into the Maidstone Borough here on this boundary. And this is habitat areas plan. Effectively, there are some areas of ancient woodland, generally in the Medway area. The only area of formal designation is a roadside nature reserve along this area here on the Lisding Road. That's shown not to be affected by the scheme. That's the slides done.
Thank you.
Just to get some more clarification on the issue, really. The transport assessment has been made by Kent County Council, and it's also been assessed by consultants employed by Medway Council, and it's also been looked at by Highways England. And none have outlined any fundamental concerns on its methodology or its conclusions that there is a limited impact on Maidstone Borough Council. Essentially, significant engineering works will take place in the Medway area that will encourage the traffic to travel via Hempstead Road, past the shopping centre, and then onto Junction 4 of the M2. The intention of these works is they will reduce overall congestion and therefore disincentivise any rat running that's currently occurring or could potentially occur. Notwithstanding the applicant's submission, there is no impact on the villages within Maidstone. They have, without prejudice, offered £100,000 toward potential improvements either to pedestrian environment or to speed control in Boxley and Bredhurst. The spending of that money would be in consultation with the parish councils. Oh.
Oh, hello.
I think her laptop was running out of power, Chairman.
Yes, it does appear to be, but I think we had virtually got to the end of the presentation there, right? Unless I was massively mistaken. So I don't think it's a problem. When Miss Geary comes back, I will check to see whether she's missed anything significant. What I'm going to do, because that won't be terribly difficult, it will be I will read out at this point the members of the public who have submitted written statements to be read out, which will be either read by me as chairman or who have submitted statements as videos to be played at the appropriate slot. If the videos don't work, which is always possible with this technology, it will be necessary for me to read out the statements. We also have Councillor Hinder speaking as a representative for Boxley Parish Council, but as he is a ward member, he's a visiting member as well, so he'll be speaking in his own right because he has that facility to do so. During the debate, I will advise members of the list of speakers that is indicating in the messaging. Do we know, Mr. O'Connell, if Marion had anything to add to the presentation?
She has rejoined the meeting now, Chairman, so you can ask her yourself.
Oh, good. Miss Geary,
yes, many apologies, a slight cable.
So it's all right. I filled the space in by just explaining which speakers we had.
Yes, sorry about that.
I think you'd more or less reached the conclusion. Did you have anything to add on the presentation?
Yes, just to say that obviously there have been a lot of objections, up to nearly 200 now. These are understood, but what the members have to understand is we are looking at the situation and issues pertinent to the administrative district of Maidstone. Medway Council will make its own assessment of the issues that impact on Medway and make its own decision. And the developer needs permission from both councils to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Now we have, as I was beginning to outline, we have Mr. Miller, an objector. We have Councillor Hinder, who I've just referred to. We have Councillor James of Bredhurst Parish Council and Mr. Hume for the applicant. So without further ado, I shall proceed to the first of statement, which is from Mr. Miller. There's no video for this one. It's a statement. Thank you for your letter about the planning meeting to discuss the application for 450 houses at Gibraltar Farm. My comments for the meeting are as follows. I have followed the planning proposals with increasing horror. I object on the following grounds. 1. This is an unnecessary development of arable land in a rare green lung of Medway, which will adversely affect the environment and local wildlife. 2. The site has no access to the rail network, meaning that all access by residents will be by road in an already over-congested area. Popular routes in the local area already see regular traffic jams at busy times of the day. Even on the larger roads like Hove Way and Walderslade Woods, smaller roads like Sharsted Way and Hempstead Road have no hope of coping with the additional traffic. This amount of new houses will lead to approximately 900 additional cars journeys on the existing road infrastructure. The site access is onto narrow country lanes which are already congested at busy times. Works traffic during construction alone will gridlock these and will certainly not cope with new residents' traffic. The proposal to solve this by adding a couple of additional parking places and changing priority of the junction is laughable. 4. Site access is adjacent to Hempstead Road, and the traffic calming measures proposed for this clearly indicate the level of concern over the increased traffic through Hempstead, even by the planners. Hempstead Road is already in desperate need of traffic calming due to heavy traffic and regular reckless driving on a residential road past a primary school and has a history of recent accidents. However, the volume of additional traffic expected in conjunction with the proposed road calming measures will lead to complete gridlock at many times of day, greatly increased pollution as vehicles queue to pass, and misery for local residents. 5. No new schools are planned, so new residents are presumably expected to drive children to the existing primary schools in Bredhurst and Hampstead, causing yet more traffic congestion and misery for residents of these villages. Secondary school access will again be by driving further to Rochester, Chatham and Rainham, increasing congestion and pollution and further harming the environment. 6. And finally, Medway Hospital and local healthcare services already struggle to provide adequate services for the existing population. How will they cope with the increase from these new houses? Regards, David Miller, and he was objecting. I now proceed to Councillor Hinder of Boxley Parish Council and a visiting member. Councillor Hinder.
Thank you. Good evening, members. Thank you for the opportunity to address you, hopefully expressing the many concerns that have been made to me by residents and to the Parish Council regarding this application. These grave concerns mainly centre around the effect this development, if allowed to proceed, would have on the infrastructure in the area. The site is served by country lanes. Let's not forget this very important point. The greatest impact will be on the rural communities of Bredhurst and Boxley Village. In mitigation, the developers offered a 106 amount of £100,000 to put in additional measures in the villages. Please bear in mind that these villages sit on a rat run between the Medway towns and Maidstone. Surely then, any measures that are installed are done so with the express desire to put off drivers using this route and travel along other routes. How can the installation of a few 20-mile-per-hour rounders in the road achieve this outcome? Both villages already have in place the recognised restrictions to slow down vehicle traffic and possibly deter people from using this route because of the heavy congestion that occurs at peak times during the day. Forge Lane in Bredhurst is only single track in places, and the suggestion to install pedestrian measures, which could be a footpath, would at the very least meaning taking out compulsory purchase orders to buy some of the residents' front gardens. Is that the sort of measure that you would agree to in order for this development to proceed? Secondly, how could improvements be made to the pedestrianisation through Boxley Village? The Parish Council recently had reports of 2 incidents in the village where pedestrians were hit by the wing mirrors of cars travelling on that very narrow stretch of road. I would maintain that the developer's statement amounts to almost creating a smokescreen of intent, but with no chance of deliverability. Both villages have a speed restriction already of 20 miles an hour. Both have chicanes at the entrances and exits. Both have warning roundels painted on the road. Both have speed humps to try and slow down the traffic. And a suggestion of having a different type of tarmac to reduce tyre noise is laughable. The noise that the residents complain about is from the speed humps and empty flatbed lorries going over them late at night. Westfield Soul Road has been singled out, illustrating improvements that could be made. Unfortunately, these improvements can only be made on land already owned by the developer and is a minor portion of that road. He's only proposing to improve the existing passing points, not put in any new ones. This route is a nightmare at any time because HGVs can use it, and this causes severe congestion. No mention is made in the reports regarding Yelsted Lane, which is often used as the alternative to Westfield Soul Road. It is also single track for virtually all of its length and is widely seen as an alternative when congestion occurs. I would like to see this road added to the list that if the development proceeds, construction traffic is not allowed to use it. Lastly, we come to Waldersay Wood Road and junction 3 of the M2. There exists documentation stating that this junction is at capacity. Yet here we are proposing more housing development that will increase the traffic density in this hotspot. Waldersay Woods Road is at present going through the process of having TROs implemented for a reduction in the speed due to its crash record, including recent fatalities. This surely is indicative of the pressures on the infrastructure, which in due course will increase from the construction of the new Lower Thames crossing, with a predicted extra 1,000 HGV movements on the route per hour. If you are minded to approve, may we request that urgent consideration be given to seeking real, meaningful improvements to the infrastructure in the Maidstone Borough for this locality through conditions. Thank you for your kind consideration of these comments from myself and Boxley Parish Council.
We now proceed to Councillor Jones of Bredhurst Parish Council, and we should have a video to play here.
Thank you, Chairman. Just bear with me while I share my desktop. Hopefully you should be able to see that. Here you go, members.
Something's happening, it's loading. Ah, excellent.
Here you go, members. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Jones, Chair of Bredhurst Parish Council. Medway Council has fought this development since 2014. Despite being approved on appeal, Medway Council refused to sell a strip of land giving access to the site from Lordswood. This has forced the applicant to propose access to the site via Ham Lane, a single-track country lane. The development of 450 houses is on the doorstep of Bredhurst, a small village of 170 houses in the Kent Downs AONB. The village is surrounded by farmland, and a development of this size will severely harm the character of our village. The applicant failed to mention the amenities in Bredhurst, which will generate more traffic from the development. We have 2 garages, a large pub, a primary school, a church, 2 community halls, and on the outskirts of the village is Wigmore Coach Park. Until COVID-19, this had 10 commuter coaches travelling daily to London. People will also travel through Bredhurst en route to Raynham train station and to bypass the congestion at junction 4 of the M2 at Hempstead. Traffic regularly travels through Bredhurst now to join the M2 coastbound at Farthing Corner. None of this has been taken into consideration by the applicant. The main route from the site to Bredhurst is along Forge Lane, which is too narrow in places for vehicles to pass. It has no footpath or lighting. There are houses along the lane and many children walk this route to school. It is already a very busy, dangerous lane. Although the applicant has offered £100,000 to fund further traffic calming in Bredhurst and Boxley, there is no indication as to how these funds would be split between the villages, and realistically, this amount of money will not go very far. Bredhurst is already used as a rat run despite extensive traffic calming measures installed in 2009. The development will make the situation much worse. No matter how much money is spent on improving the road layout at Sharsted Way, Hempstead, no alterations can cope with the sheer volume of traffic already in the area. Another 450 houses will bring roads to a standstill. People will not sit in their cars queuing through Hempstead, but instead will use the country lanes through Bredhurst as they do now. The applicant states the impact on Bredhurst will be negligible and believes traffic from the development will go through Hempstead. This is nonsense and shows no understanding or local knowledge of the area. Hopefully you will have seen the video we have submitted showing the narrow lanes from Bredhurst to the development. Please listen to the concerns of Bredhurst Parish Council and residents, and we strongly urge you to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. We now proceed to a video from the applicant, Mr. Hume, which I hope we have.
Yeah, just bear with me 2 seconds while I switch that over. You can note my pictures of my nice picture of polar bears. Just bear with me 2 seconds. I'll just switch that over for you. This is
I'm sure those aren't local residents of Bredhurst.
So this is Alistair Hume.
Thank you.
Just bear with me while it loads. Takes a few moments because it's on YouTube. I do apologise. Hang on.
No, that's fine.
Sorry about this, members. Not sure why it's just spinning. Bear with me.
I do have a statement that if need
You do.
be.
I will try. I'm just going to try it one more time, Chairman, because it worked earlier. I know it works. So I'll just try it one more time for you. I'll try it one more time.
Oh well.
No,
I think we're going to have to revert
read
to
the statement. I
the,
apologise. It was tested, but it's just spinning. So I apologise for that, Chairman.
These things can happen. This is a statement on behalf of Mr. Hume, who is the applicant. Good evening. All of the housing development for this proposal lies within Medway's boundary and is very similar in terms of landscape buffering and layout to the scheme that was approved by the Secretary of State after a public inquiry and then renewed later by Medway. That permission remains extant and is the applicant's fallback position, which is relevant to your consideration of the issues this evening. The approved scheme for 450 dwellings provided access from North Dane Way. The client continues to engage with Medway Council to secure this access and has offered a significant financial sum to achieve this. This proposal will help to allow the early delivery of this important housing site via an alternative access route from Ham Lane, serving to meet Medway's housing needs, who only have a 3-year supply at present and have achieved just 48% of their housing delivery test target. This is important background as the approved housing development access from North Down Way will result in car movements through the villages of Bredhurst and Boxley, and the landscape and technical impacts of the proposed development of 450 houses is not a material planning issue this evening, as the principal development has already been established. There are 2 areas of actual physical change associated with this proposal which lie within Maidstone Borough, which are the repositioning of the junction of the Ham Lane Capstan Road and Lidsin Hampstead Road and to some widening of at this point, and the provision of a formal passing bay on Westfield Seoul Road, where the increase in the width of the channel will range between 1.1 and 2.5 metres. The changes to the road junction widths and alignment will improve visibility, create a right turn waiting lane which, combined with speed restrictions, are accepted by the highway authorities to improve highway safety. It will allow pedestrian and cycleway connections to be created from the development along Hempstead Road, where none exist at present, which will help to reduce car usage and provide a non-car link to Lordswood. Additional landscaping will be provided and no trees or hedgerows will be removed. As well as these improvements, the Ham Lane access will create a journey desire line via Hampstead Road to junction 4 of the M2. Capacity improvements to other junctions in Medway, in particular Heathway, Sharsted Way roundabout, are also proposed, which will improve circulation and connectivity with junction 4. By contrast, the already approved North Dane Way access would have directed more traffic to junction 3, which is accepted as having less capacity, and we believe would encourage more rat running through the nearby Maidstone villages to avoid this bottleneck than the scheme before you. A significant amount of modelling has been undertaken by the applicant to achieve clearance with Highways England, KCC Highways and Medway Council as Highway Authority. On this basis, the transport modelling findings, which show a low level of traffic likely to route via Boxley and Bredhurst, is considered to be robust. For these reasons, members are requested to support the recommendation so that the scheme can then be considered by Medway Council's Planning Committee, and that was from Mr. Hume, the applicant. Before we go any further, given that so much of this is about highways, I would like to ask Mr. Wright of KCC Highways whether he has any comments at this point.
Thank you, Chairman. In reviewing this application, the County Council's local highway authority has carefully considered the additional demand for travel created by the proposed development and how that will impact upon the local highway network falling within the County Council's jurisdiction. The applicant has demonstrated that a compliant site access arrangement via Ham Lane and Lidsing Road can be achieved. This involves alterations to the existing road layout and reductions to speed limits. The applicant has also proposed a series of junction improvements along the route to M2 Junction 4. These all lie within Medway jurisdiction. Capacity modelling has shown how these improvements will mitigate the impact of the development and achieve a reduction in delays when compared against the existing situation. This is important in how it incentivises most trips to use the Medway network rather than the County Council's network within Maidstone Borough. Timely delivery of the junction improvements is essential in ensuring that these patterns of movement are encouraged from the outset. The applicant has proposed to mitigate the residual impact on the County Council's network through the provision of passing bays on part of Westfield Sol Road and a financial contribution towards further traffic calming measures in the villages of Boxley and Bredhurst. In conclusion, the County Council has no justifiable grounds on which to raise an objection to this planning application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Councillor Harwood, I've seen you indicating you wishing to speak, and so far you are the only person wishing to speak, so over to you.
Right, thank you. Yeah, I am aware that there are ward councillors here, but they are unable to speak because of predetermination, I understand. Yeah, and this is a really significant application. I mean, clearly for a very open landscape, the foreground of the AONB, and it has certainly caused a stir. That said, a number of you who have been around for a while will remember that prior to call for sites governing the way that areas were allocated for housing, we used to undergo a lot of kind of planning for real exercises with big maps, with sticking post-it notes on them and so on to work out where we did have capacity and where development could go. And this area, this wider area around the Medway boundary at Hempstead, always was a favourite. I mean, I think for one reason, in that it's very close to Medway, not very close to Maidstone. But I think the real reason for it was that it was always seen as an exemplar in an arable prairie. And I think the statement that was made by the applicant that this many houses can be fitted into the site without removing a single twig of a single tree or hedgerow betrays one of those landscape reasons why this area came out as potentially doing less harm. I think the other significant issue we need was a driver on this area being identified potentially for housing was proximity to infrastructure, and namely the M2, and big shopping areas in Hempstead Valley and the areas around there. So I think actually, in terms of the numbers of units that are being talked about, the impacts are minimised to some degree, and I cannot think of anywhere else in the borough where you could put this many houses in with, I know some are overlapping into Medway, without causing very, very significant landscape and transport infrastructure harm. So I think that's what's going for it in a certain respect. However, I do have some concerns about the landscape master planning and the sensitivity of this site. I mean, interestingly enough, is at Medway end. It as you go head toward Capstone Valley to the west of Elm Court, you've got Hookwood, and you've got Hallwood, and you've got Holtwood, and they're classic fragmented ancient woodlands, which are all being disconnected through a kind of hollowing out through a lot of fairly recent housing development. And in terms of master planning, my preference would be to really concentrate landscaping and linkage into reconnecting those three severed ancient woodlands. So if we were to grant approval for this outline scheme, that when the applicants come to putting the detailed scheme together, I would wish to see much better reconnection of those fragmented woodlands. And I believe it can be done by just softening the very, very western extent of the area which is shown for housing. I think in terms of the key concern that both Bredhurst and Boxley Parish Council have related to the collateral impact from traffic. And I think actually everything that's been stated by KCC in relation to the measures planned, channeling traffic towards the M2 and toward Medway, I think are true. I think as much has been done as possibly can be in that respect. And I think if we were going to attempt to use a traffic reason for refusal have impact on Boxley and Bredhurst, frankly, the generation from this development to drop in the ocean of that commuter rat running that we're getting from the wider Hempstead, Waterslade, Lordswood, Wheatwood area. And I think it's very difficult to evidence any palpable change. So with all that taken into account, and with a reference that we asked the officers to go back to look at potentially softening the Capstone Valley western end and reconnecting the ancient woodland, I'm prepared to move as per the updated condition.
Councillor Harwood, just briefly, I think Councillor Hinder mentioned that if we were minded to approve an additional road that he wanted, I think, a traffic regulation order to be extended to. Did you pick up on that?
Yeah, I did. I would like the highways advice on that as to whether it is realistic and we can genuinely ask for that. So perhaps if we can have some advice on that, and if the advice is in the affirmative, I'm happy to add it onto the conditions list.
Okay, Brendan, I'm coming back to you on that specific point. Mr. Wright?
Yeah, that's certainly something that we can investigate. We're open to dialogue on that. Clearly, a traffic regulation order is the subject of its own approval process, so that can't be guaranteed. But we're more than open to look into it.
Okay, in that case, Tony, you've heard the answer.
In that case, I'll move as per the paper, but with looking at the landscaping at the western Capstone Valley extent, with a reference from this committee that we seek the TRO in line with Boxley Parish Council's proposal.
Okay, and is that seconded by anyone at this stage? No, in that case, I'll second it. And I will just choose to speak now. Most of the comments, understandable comments from local residents and the parish councils have been about traffic, which and the highway issues, which are largely the issues that fall within the Maidstone borough. It is quite hard to see, given the absolutely unequivocal statement from Kent Highways, how a ground of refusal on that could be substantiated. And in relation to the housing issues, given the history of this site, it's extremely hard to see how an objection on the housing grounds could be substantiated. So I can understand the public concern about this application, but unlike some other applications we've had recently, there isn't much of a doubt about. There's no doubt in my mind that this is in a situation where there are simply no grounds for refusal. Councillor Mumford, you indicated. Councillor Mumford?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, Councillor.
Right, it's just that I like common sense, and not always is it common. I understand that we can't object on highways grounds, but I just find it amazing, and perhaps the officer can actually clear my mind. To make this site more sustainable, it would be obvious to open it to Lord's Wood. Because Medway have the control of that, I'm just wondering, what is the logic of not opening this to Lord's Wood and isolating it in effectively the countryside and emptying it out onto the ANOB? I do understand that this has got highways approval, or there's no objection from highway, but for my vote, I've got to understand that.
I think, unless I've got it completely wrong, that they're using their power as a landowner in a situation where they can't use their power as a planning authority. Unless I've got that wrong. Mrs. Geary, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, that's correct. The developer has been in liaison with Medway Council to secure the purchase of that strip of land it needs for several years. They've undertaken other legal options as well to force the sale, and that they have failed in that. So effectively, with that effectively being blocked on that route, this is the only alternative, is to use land where Medway Council's landowner does not have that right to block an access. So that's, that the history is complicated, but that's why we are where we are with this particular scheme.
Miss Geary, while you're on, can you confirm that whether any of the housing element, and if so, which bit falls within Maidstone? Any of the housing?
None of the housing.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
So to clarify, members, we are only considering within the borough of Maidstone the highway issues. So if we had a housing objection to something that's in Medway, draw the obvious conclusion. Councillor Mumford, had you finished, or had you something to add?
No, I think it's odd that they don't want to make it more sustainable and just put it in the countryside. However, there's not a lot I can do about that.
Councillor Bryce.
Thank you, Chairman. I share Councillor Mumford's concerns about, I'm just looking at the map with lots of tiny track lanes, emptying 450 houses, and we've got those 450 housing sites being built around here. So we're all very aware of the highways movements and the extra traffic these will generate. And I don't understand why there isn't an issue here, why there isn't highways grounds.
There aren't any highways grounds because Kent Highway have said there aren't.
Exactly, but I don't understand why we're looking at single track lanes where there's going to have to be, if Councillor Hinder is correct, compulsory purchase orders just to have passing way. How that's seen as sustainable or mitigated. It doesn't make sense. The question I have, though, Chair, is there's an allocation of funds towards a bus service. It seems a very small amount to me, given my knowledge of bus services and how much they cost to provide. So can you give more, do we have anybody there to give us more details on what level of mitigation has been awarded to this bus service being provided, and what is the frequency of the bus service that is going to be provided?
It's a very fair question. Miss Geary, do you or Mr. Wright from KCC Highways have the answer to that question?
I'm happy to try and, well, I probably will need Brenda's help as well. The bus services will all be in the Medway district. Is the layout now on screen? You can all see the layout. Yes, effectively, the pedestrian link to the residents will be here. So the bus services they will expect to be accessed will be in the Lordswood area. So Medway Council have negotiated that amount of money to go towards helping Riva buses just change the timetable of the buses there. But it's something that really is for Medway Council to be involved in. But we have asked that KCC be involved in those discussions. But as the buses are within Medway, and that's where the services will be, it's not something we particularly want to get involved in.
No, but if we're saying that this affects the number of traffic movements that have been projected, because we're assuming that we will, put some people on a bus, if we don't know how frequently those buses are or how that contributes to any mitigation proposals, then that's obviously an important consideration.
Well, actually, it's not for us, I don't think, because all we're really literally being asked to approve or not are two changes to the highway layout.
But
literally.
But Clive, if we're saying that that the highways proposals are acceptable based on traffic movements, and if some of those traffic movements are based on the fact that we assume a certain proportion of people from the state will catch a bus, if we don't know if we believe those. If we believe that modelling or find it credible, then actually it does matter, because do you see what I mean? It impacts on the
Well, I see what you're saying, but essentially a Section 106 contribution would be related to the housing development, none of which, but anyway, never mind. Perhaps I'm overthinking it.
Brendan, do you have any comments? What proportion of the traffic flow is accounted for by the bus service being passing by?
Well, the applicant submitted a transport assessment, which has included a set of trip rates derived from a database of comparable sites. So all the traffic forecasts for this development will take account of accessibility characteristics of sites that are comparable to this one. So they would factor in the scope for public transport to be made more accessible. So that has been accounted within the assessment of impact on the wider network. I think it would be fair to say that the details within the transport assessment on what was going to be done to public transport were sketchy. There's clearly some detail that needs to be worked through on that. I do recall that the developer had designed the layout in such a way that it could actually accommodate a bus service within it. So clearly that offers the opportunity for buses to actually circulate within the site itself, and that would enable more people to access and use that service. But I think clearly as part of the legal agreement, I think there's further dialogue to be had in terms of the specifics of the service and how that money gets spent.
So, Brent, do you have a view then on what proportion of traffic flow is being mitigated by the bus service? Is any of it, or is none of it?
Well, there would be an element of the trip generation that would involve trips by public transport.
So
I would need to consult the report to give you a precise figure on that.
I think I would like to know it, because if we're saying these lanes won't be inundated because the modelling is correct, and just 212,000, 212, that amount of money, doesn't. I'd like to know how many bus services that puts past that estate, because it doesn't seem a huge amount to me. But I don't want to. I can sense that I'm holding up the meeting. But it is a concern. So
what I would ask you, Councillor Bryce, is if you have a particular course of action, because as Mr. Wright said, this hasn't quite been finalised, a particular course of action that you would recommend us to take, you think about whether you want to amend any of that proposal as we go forward in terms of either money or procedure, because if there's work still to be done on that transport plan, it may well be that you confirm that up a bit, or we confirm it up a bit, but we're not going to be able to do that. We're not going to be able to get the answers to that until they've done that work, and that could be several weeks from now. So if you want to think about that, Mr. Wright, what would be most helpful to you from members to actually make sure that there is the most robust bus service contribution that can be achieved here? How can we help you, so to speak?
I think we're looking for flexibility at this stage, so that we can thrash out the detail of this and ensure that we achieve the best possible outcome. So the money goes goes towards a meaningful improvement that will benefit the residents of the development. So flexibility is key, really, for us.
Okay, thank you. Right, Councillor Spooner, I think, was next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It seems to me that the residents of of Maidstone, and of Boxley and Bredhurst are getting a pretty rough deal out of this, and I just can't see what we can do about it. It seems to me that for reasons best known to itself, Medway Council, in deciding not to make an access available onto North Dane Way, has decided that instead of 100% of the traffic from this scheme going out through Lordswood and through the Medway towns, 80% will go out through Hempstead and 20% through Maidstone. And sadly, I don't see anything we can do about it, unless there is a strong highway objection, which we've heard from Brendan Wright, there isn't. Therefore, with a heavy heart, I think I have to support the recommendation to approve this. But in doing that, I think we should do everything we can to improve the landscaping as suggested by Councillor Harwood, and also the additional highway improvements suggested by Boxley, and if possible, get a better bus service.
Do you want to do you think it would be helpful to put an informative on referring to the bus service?
I think I'll be I think we need to mitigate as strongly as we possibly can, because I think Maidstone residents are getting a rough deal out of this, when in theory 100% of this traffic could all go out through Lordswood and through the Medway towns. But as I say, for reasons best known to themselves, Medway Council will obviously, they've got a ransom strip there, which is quite valuable. I would have thought that would, be quite valuable for the council taxpayers of Medway towns, but they obviously won't do it, and there's nothing we can do.
Right, I'm going to conclude with the two people who had already indicated to speak, because there is very little that can be added to this discussion. Right, Councillor Atkinson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, I don't wish to go over that previous ground. I'm just looking at some of the conditions on here. Condition 6 about the cycleway, I think we should clarify that it should be to Sustrand standards, i.e. 3 metres in width. I'd like to see that included. There's no mention of, no specific mention in condition 8 of native species, so I'd like to see native species included. So I see in paragraph 2.05 they're talking about sycamore trees. I wouldn't want to see them included. But
no, we don't want any sycamores.
No, we really don't, no. So I would specifically exclude them. So that's on the outline one. Then on the adjustment one, the other one, I'd like to also see the Sustrand standards included in that one, and also a mention of native species, but no sycamore. So I'd like to see those things included. Thank you very much.
Councillor Harwood, do you have any comments on that, as it's your motion?
Well, I did raise with officers the whole issue around the gaps under fences and all of the biodiversity improvements that we demand, and I mentioned native species. Looking at the species list in front of us on the landscape layout, it looks pretty good, I've got to say, and we have seen some of the substitution of some of the issues that Keith mentioned. But I have we always used to say a scheme of landscaping using indigenous species. I think the proximity to the OMB makes it very important, so very happy to take that on board. I think the only issue with the Sustrand's 3 metre gap is the link through to Lordswood is going through the very green buffer that we were talking about, and I do worry about if it's 3 metres, we get all the issues with motorcycles coming in and other things. So I think we need an element of flexibility, not a massive length of cycleway. It is a link. So I think in this case, I don't think that it really applies in the way that it does with perhaps some other schemes, because as you can see from the diagram, the little red line, it is literally a link.
Yes, I take your point. Right, Councillor Wilby.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, most of it's been said. I'm actually quite amazed with this development in one sense. I know it's an arable field, but when you look at the map, this does serve as a lung for Medway Towns, and this will shut it off. And I probably would just like some consistency from the highway agency, to be honest. It seems weird that 450 houses last week on a lane like this was objected to, and then this week there's no objection from the highway agency. So it just seems inconsistent in my eyes, to be honest. That's all I'd like to say.
Right. I'm going to take one more speaker, as I think she is a fairly local member, and that's Councillor Young, and then we are going to go to a vote unless someone raises something significant. Councillor Young.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. I just wanted the point clarified. All these mitigation measures that are going to be taken on these lanes that are going to be used to exit this development, is there any way that this can all be carried out before the development is built? So is that a possibility, or does it have to wait until the building is underway and both things are happening at the same time?
I'm sure there was reference to that in the sorry, Mr. Wright, I nearly called you a councillor there. I'm sorry for the demotion. Can you answer that one, please, for us? Or Miss Geary, whichever.
Well, our advice as Highway Authority has been that the improvements in Medway, which are geared towards ensuring that traffic routes via Medway and Junction 4 of the M2 rather than the network that's in Maidstone Borough, our advice has been that those improvements should be delivered at the earliest possible opportunity. I mean, that's essential if we're going to minimise any residual impact on the local roads that we've heard a lot of concern about.
Yeah, just to say, it's condition 5 is the condition that Councillor Young is referring to.
I thought I'd heard some reference to it in the report. Thank you very much.
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I think sadly it's all been said, and yes, like other members of this council, I am a little chagrined about the position we've been placed in by our neighbours. Leaves us with the motion on the table as amended. Is everyone clear what the amendments to the recommendation are?
No, can you please read it out?
Tony,
or clarify, summarise.
Yes, of course. Councillor Harwood, are you in a position to do that?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it's the set of recommendations as per the papers with the urgent update, and we have added a further reference, I suppose, it's to Medway Council, but also that we put it in as a submission from a near neighbour, that the landscape treatment at the western extent of the site to the west of Elm Court should be revisited to achieve a thicker buffer of planting around the boundary, which will connect the 3 ancient woodlands which still persist at that end of the site. That was one suggestion. The other one was that we add a proposal for a traffic regulation order in order to address some of the issues on the site in line with Boxley Parish Council's wishes. And then I think the third issue is that we just, again, we can only Medway Council to tighten up some of the conditions around landscape and biodiversity in terms of fleeces and boundary treatments and so on. I think that was everything.
I think Miss Geary wants to add something on condition 6. Marion?
Yes, in my verbal update, condition 6 just needs tweaking to a degree on making sure that the cycleway footway on land outside the applicant's control is carried out before there is any development in Maidstone. We need a Grampian condition along those lines, but that was in a verbal update. Just want to be sure that's included in the recommendation.
Yes, for surety's sake, we're including that.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. O'Connell, if you would like to take the vote on the motion as amended in alphabetical order, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just clarify in terms of the voting? Obviously, we've got 2 applications here.
Yes.
Are we voting on the outline and then the adjourned?
Sorry,
adjoining. Adjourned.
Yes, we will need to do that separately. Outline first.
Okay, thank you. And just to clarify, I will not be calling out Councillor Brindle's name as she's not taking part in this vote. So, Councillor Atkinson?
For.
Councillor Bryce?
Against.
Councillor Chapel-Tay?
For.
Councillor English?
For.
Councillor Harwood?
For.
Councillor Clements?
For.
Councillor Munford?
For.
Councillor Perry?
Against.
Councillor Spooner?
For.
Councillor Vizard?
For.
Councillor Wilby?
Abstain.
And Councillor Young?
Against.
Thank you. That concludes the voting.
Mrs. Snook, can we have the figures, please? Hello, Debbie. Have you got the count?
Just checking through now, Chairman.
Thank you.
Right, that's 8 for, 3 against and 1 abstention.
Thank you. Therefore, the recommendation as amended is passed. We move on to the adjoining authority consultation. I'll call the roll again, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Atkinson?
For.
Councillor Bryce?
Against.
Councillor Chapel-Tay?
For.
Councillor English?
For.
Councillor Harwood?
For.
Councillor Clements?
For.
Councillor Munford?
For.
Councillor Perry?
Against.
Councillor Spooner?
For.
Councillor Vizard?
For.
Councillor Wilby?
Abstain.
And Councillor Young?
Against.
Thank you, Chairman.
I think the count was the same, Mrs. Snook, but if you could clarify for me.
That's correct, Chairman.
In that case, that recommendation is agreed as well. There will be a 5-minute recess in case anyone needs to put the kettle on or do anything or leave the meeting, and we will reconvene at 20 past. So we'll proceed to the next item on the agenda, which is former Roots site, Len House, Mill Street, Palace Avenue, Maidstone. Ask the officer to introduce the report.
So I'll take an attendance first. Sorry, Chairman.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
Just to make sure all members are in the room.
Yes, that might be a good idea, just in case we've lost anyone.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Atkinson?
Present.
Councillor Bryce?
Present.
Councillor Brindle?
Present.
Councillor Chapel-Tay?
Present.
Councillor English?
Present.
Councillor Harwood?
Sorry, I was muted. Present.
Councillor Kimmins?
Present.
Councillor Munford?
Present.
Councillor Perry?
Present.
Councillor Spooner? Councillor Spooner?
Present.
Councillor Vizard?
Present.
Councillor Wilby? So was that present? Sounded quiet.
I think
Councillor
it
Wilby?
was.
Yeah, present.
Thank you. And Councillor Young?
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that, Mr. O'Connell. I now call upon Mr. Austin Mackey to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Hopefully you can see the presentation on screen and have good audio. This presentation addresses both the planning application and listed building consent applications for Len House, Maidstone. To avoid repetition, I'll cover both applications within the single presentation, but members will need to then consider both applications separately. Firstly, the planning application, followed by the listed building consent. Len House is a significant building within the landscape of the town centre, being both large in scale and of a significant modernist design that was influenced by the aviation industry of the 1930s. It is Grade 2 listed and lies within the Maidstone Town Conservation Area. It is also located within the early medieval part of the town centre, and there are therefore a significant number of other heritage assets within its wider setting. The site is now vacant, the previous motor dealership having vacated the site last year to move to modern premises on the edge of town. The site is located within the southern part of the main commercial area of the town centre, with frontages to both Mill Street and Palace Avenue. The site also fronts onto the River Len, part of which is open in front of the building and part of which is in a culvert under the eastern part of the site. To the north and east of the site, the application site abuts the active commercial areas of Bank Street and Gabriel's Hill, and the officer report identifies relevant considerations arising from this relationship with existing town centre uses, and I'll come on to explain that further in the presentation. During the 19th century, as shown on the image on the left, the site was a tannery that was developed in this location to take advantage of the site's relationship with the watercourse. During the First World War, the site was taken over by the Roots Group and operated as an engineering works. However, in the 1930s, the company chose the site as the location for its new flagship dealership. The new building was completed in 1941. It's very unique in that so much of the architect's original vision is retained within the building fabric today, and this is principally due to the building's continuous occupation by the same company from the day that it was built. As a result, there are a significant number of heritage features that are retained within the building. Externally, you can see the very predominant horizontal banding of glazed windows. Internally, the large original workshops are still principally intact in their original form. You can see the 1930s on the left and the current on the right. And also notably, the original vehicle ramp that was built to allow commercial vehicles access to the first floor still remains today. These are all features of heritage significance that are key factors that determine the ultimate success of any restoration scheme. Some features have, however, been lost, including, for example, the original petrol forecourt and kiosk and the iconic signage that was provided around the Mill Street entrance. Turning to the proposals, the first element of the scheme involves the refurbishment and extension of Len House itself. This image identifies that in terms of its architectural significance, the principal glazed appearance of the building and the horizontal windows will be retained, with a lightweight upper addition. Internally, this image here shows the breakdown of uses within the building. You can see on the lower floor, the large workshop area will be converted to a commercial use, principally in the style of a food hall, bar and food and drink uses. The vehicle ramp will be retained for its original purpose and will give access to first floor car parking, which initially seems an odd location for car parking, but actually makes good use of a relatively dark and uninhabitable void in the first floor of the building. To the front will be residential apartments on the first floor of the existing building, and then 2 floors of new accommodation built above, but importantly set back from the main building frontage and dropped down below the height of the existing parapet in order to maintain or to reduce their visual impact. This image shows the proposed view of the site from the crossroad at the foot of Mill Street. You can see the former petrol forecourt in front, the original building, and then the new additions peering above. In terms of both its townscape impact and its impact in terms of the setting of the surrounding heritage assets, officers consider that the impact is at the very lower end of less than significant. This aerial view shows the scheme as a whole, so you can see the main converted building, and members might take this opportunity to note the significant array of PV and green roof that can be achieved because of the flat roof nature of the building. There are 2 new build elements, principally to the east and rear of the existing building. The first of these is the building that fronts onto Palace Avenue. This building has been designed to complement but appear subservient to Len House, so it follows a similar built form with a horizontal emphasis, but is lower in nature, less ornate in its detailing, but completes the frontage in a way that might have been done had Len House been extended at some point in the past. The element to the rear is very different in architectural style and tries to pick up on the more historical medieval references to parts of the town centre. So here the buildings have a far more vertical emphasis, a more organic form, and utilised principally pitched roofs. This aerial picture shows the 2 new build elements, and I think this is a useful image to understand the relationship between the new build element at the rear of the site and the established operations, businesses and dwellings to the rear of Bank Street. If you can see my cursor, you can see here where the proposed building has been deliberately reduced in height in order to allow daylight, natural light through to residential properties behind. But it's important that members also note the relationship of the building to established commercial operations. Here you can see the roof terrace on one of the adjacent bars. Just to the left you can see the cover over the large garden to the rear of the beer cellar. In the officer's report we detail the objections and concerns that have been raised by the operators of those premises. Their principal concern being that the introduction of new residential accommodation in such close proximity to established businesses could result in them not being able to renew their licenses or have significantly reduced hours of operation because of the potential for noise complaints from the new residents of the scheme. Officers propose that a condition be imposed on any grant of planning permission that requires a very detailed scheme of acoustic insulation for those properties, both the new build and the conversion of the existing building, where they lie adjacent to or could be impacted upon by adjacent commercial uses. That survey hasn't been possible during the current conditions because those operations have naturally been closed. Therefore, the condition would require that survey work to be carried out once they are back in typical operation, so that true noise levels are able to be secured and that a detailed scheme of mitigation is agreed prior to any development commencing. On that basis, officers consider that the scheme should be capable of ensuring that there is adequate acoustic protection for the new residents within the scheme. Turning to the landscape proposals, again you can see the significant array of solar panels set within a green roof that itself will provide significant surface water drainage advantages. The principal areas of public realm include the former petrol kiosk to the Mill Street frontage, a proposed new boardwalk that will provide connections east-west, not only allowing some of the activity within the building to take place on the boardwalk, but importantly will also allow residents an east-west route that doesn't require walking along the heavily trafficked and very noisy pavement of Palace Avenue. To the north of the scheme, you can see the podium gardens that will be provided for the residents of the new scheme. And then on this drawing, the two main water bodies, the mill pond is owned by the council, but the applicant is proposing a scheme of biodiversity enhancement. And there was a very late urgent update relating to the eastern part of the site, but I'll present that verbally so that members understand more about the issue that some of your colleagues have raised. Just turning to the public realm areas first, you can see on the left the original rather iconic petrol kiosk, and to the right an initial artistic impression of how that would be recreated, but to provide a food and drink style kiosk that would relate well to the food and drink uses within the main building. This area could also be used for example, farmers markets or other outdoor activities complementary to the overall use. The specific details of the kiosk and this scheme would be brought forward either through planning conditions or a separate planning application. This image shows the proposed boardwalk. Members should understand that the boardwalk would be cantilevered off the main building rather than being supported on stilts into the water. The ecological assessment identifies that there may be some relatively limited impacts from the overshadowing of the water beneath, but the ecologists have highlighted that being a south-facing area, much of the natural light to the area under the boardwalk would still be achieved. You can see bottom left an example of some of the biodiversity enhancements that would be proposed, with some connections to the boardwalk and some individual floating habitats. The podium garden for the residents of the scheme would be provided inside the U-shape of the block surrounding the site, and that would provide an acoustic barrier from the commercial uses to the north. Residents within the front part of the listed building would have winter gardens. These serve to protect the character of the front elevation of the building, but also provide a second acoustic barrier in terms of traffic from the road or other impacts. Above, the residents would have a balcony set behind a green bund and have views over the waterway. Returning to the issue of the eastern part of the site, when the planning application was first submitted, the applicants agreed that they would include proposals to deculvert or daylight that section of the Len that is currently underground. However, having considered the feasibility and viability of those works, they concluded that they couldn't be delivered within the financial constraints of the application. They have therefore proposed an alternative, which is a shallow surface water feature that provides an indication of the water alignment, but doesn't involve the costs and uncertainties of excavating the len. Officers consider that whilst the removal of this element from the scheme is regrettable, the ecological advantages of delivering the deculverting are not yet fully understood. There could be some adverse impacts because there may be habitats and species that rely on the darkened section and therefore the security of the culverted element. And there is no understanding of what the construction impacts would be in terms of the ecology. For example, having to dam the len, entirely blocking the route for migration of animals or species through there isn't known. So officers don't consider that the ecological impact of the alternative proposal is adverse and that with this the scheme is in itself acceptable. However, the applicant is willing to consider a working group to identify in further detail whether the delivery of the deculverting is possible, and if so, whether that can be delivered by the developer or, for example, by the council using Section 106 and other funds. So whilst officers consider the developer's alternative proposal to be acceptable, the developer is willing to consider the issue further through the submission of further assessments that they will fund pursuant to the planning permission. So to summarise on the key issues, this is a highly sustainable town centre site. The principle of mixed use development is welcomed. In terms of heritage considerations, the restoration of the listed building is something that we would afford considerable weight to. The report identifies that there may be less than substantial harm in terms of the inevitable alterations to the building, the erection of the roof extension, and, for example, the introduction of a larger scale of development than is traditional within the conservation area. However, there are also significant heritage benefits that arise from the scheme, which must be balanced against those impacts. The scheme itself is considered to be of a very high quality design with a positive townscape impact. In terms of ecology and biodiversity, the site as it exists, with the exception of the mill pond, has a very low ecological value, and we consider that significant biodiversity benefits would arise. In terms of living conditions, for those neighbouring the development, we consider that the design has mitigated those impacts, and for those within the development, subject to the aforementioned conditions regarding noise, we consider that an acceptable level of amenity for future residents can be achieved. In terms of town centre impacts, the combination of uses proposed would have a positive impact on the vitality and viability of the town centre. We consider that the ongoing viability of the neighbouring commercial uses can be addressed through the further sound assessments and scheme design. So on balance, whilst there are some adverse impacts in terms of less than significant harm to heritage assets, officers consider that there are significant public benefits arising from the development, and we therefore recommend that on balance, planning permission be granted and the associated consent for listed building works be granted too. Thank you.
Chairman, are you there?
Sorry, for some reason, I had a connectivity problem for a second. I'm back now. We have statements from Mr. Ashdown, an objector, Mr. Baker, a residents association, and Mr. Holloway has submitted a video who is from the applicant. I will commence with the statement from Mr. Ashdown. Dear Sir, please find our argued bullet points for the above proposal to be rejected. Number 1, traffic generation highway safety. The one-way system is already very busy with one of the highest levels of pollution in the country, with much of the local area deemed to have dangerous levels of air pollution. With nearby Upper Stone Street, the 5th highest polluted area outside of London, this application will make the area even more toxic. The area's roads cannot take even more traffic. The area is always gridlocked, but this development will add additional issues to the highway and infrastructure, to the schools, to car parking, doctors and dentists. 2. Banks Bar Licensed Garden. Banks has a beautiful outside garden area that is used by customers to relax with music. Our license is until midnight. The apartments will be built close to the garden, and we are concerned that along with the other bars and clubs along the High Street and Bank Street, that the people who purchase the flats will immediately start to complain about the noise and privacy and request that our licence is revoked, despite the club residing in the area for well over 20 years. As the council is aware, Maidstone has an excellent reputation for nightclubs, restaurants and bars. Banks has over the years pioneered the local music scene, holding events in the garden area that showcase local talent mixed with globally famous DJs, which brings in additional revenue to the area as customers use the hotels, restaurants, pubs, cafes, shops and local taxi services. We estimate that each event brings over £100,000 of business to the local area. If our outdoor licence was to be revoked due to complaints from the neighbouring flats, this reputation and revenue would swiftly disappear. 3. Commercial floor space. We note that there will be flexible commercial floor space in the plans. We feel that any retail shops that take this up will take business away from the high street, which is already struggling. Item 4. The Section 106 agreement. If this planning application is approved despite the objection, banks would seek an agreement with support from the council and the developers for a Section 106 agreement which allows the club a very high level of acoustic protection. An example of this is the Ministry of Sound in London, who were awarded this for a development that was built within metres of the club. Thank you for your time. Steve Ashdown, Banks Bar Director. And proceeding to the Residents Association, we have a submission from Mr. Baker. We have very serious concerns about the plans for Len House and the proposed buildings to the rear. As can be clearly seen in the amended document, proposed site section 3B and C, the buildings to the rear massively overshadow our properties, which can be seen in that plan marked as B. They are roughly twice the height of our building, and with this proximity, this inevitably causes a huge loss of light and privacy, as all our light comes from the end of our building and was the primary reason we purchased our home. The light will be reduced drastically with this development. The document proposed rear building elevation 2 does show a small gap in the buildings, but the height of the building and the gap is approximately the same height as ours, negating the intention of lowering them in the first place. The implied notion that this was done as an accommodation is void because there is a covenant on that land that prevents building over a certain height. There are several windows that face our property on the rear development, but there are a large number on the proposed extra stories on top of Len House. When Len House was last occupied, mechanics working there would often wave at us while we were in our flat, so the existing second floor windows definitely overlook us. Our privacy was invaded as it was then. A further 2 stories on Len House overlooking our rear would mean a greater invasion of privacy would be certain. From our property, we can see well-established trees and vegetation as we look to the left and right and around. These help the visual amenity of the area. If the proposed works go ahead as currently planned, we would see nothing but concrete, brick, glass and tarmac. This will have a detrimental effect on the fauna itself, the viability of our property as a residential unit and our own mental health. Regarding noise, All the flats in our area have good quality secondary glazing, in some cases triple glazing, and even this is insufficient for the noise generated by the local entertainment venues into the early hours. This is contrary to the applicant's statement in paragraph 6.1 of the Planning Committee report. We have found that use of strict measures can make the effects of sound worse, as the base end of the audio reverberates throughout the building, having the effect of knocking things off shelves. Opening windows eases this, but causes us to be affected by the high spectrum audio volume. Our previously raised concerns about pollution, air quality and traffic still stand and have not been addressed in this new document as far as we can see. We also are concerned that our view of Len House, as it is, will be no more. The project is an example of overdevelopment, especially with the height of the new building and the extra stories on Len House. These extra stories themselves would be overshadowed by the building to the rear, as clearly seen in the amended document proposed site section A. Thank you very much for listening to our concerns. And I hope that we have a video from Mr. Holloway for the applicant.
We do indeed. Just bear with me, Chairman, while I share my screen. Just as a warning, members, there is some music in the background of this. It's not me playing music, it's part of the video, just to warn you. Hopefully you will be able to see my screen shortly. Just indicate when you can.
Yeah, well, we've got a picture.
Of Len House, excellent. I'm going to play that for you right now.
Len House in Maidstone is one of the finest examples of modernist architecture. Built in the 1930s, this Grade 2 listed industrial building sits behind Maidstone's historic High Street and right on the River Len. Formerly known as Roots Garage, this building was also used in World War II to manufacture vehicles for the war. This building is famous for its vehicular ramp, which allows vehicles to access the first floor, supported by a huge structure with beams as deep as 1 metre. And sadly lost is its iconic pumping station to the front courtyard. Len House was the inspiration for this Fisher-Price toy from the 1970s. This is an opportunity to enhance the biodiversity along the river by planting new species and improving the water quality. And we're proposing to extend the watercourse with a natural pond at the eastern end of the site. Behind Len House, we're creating a landscaped podium garden, and underneath we'll be able to hide the majority of the residential parking. If we look at a section of Len House, we have carefully nestled 2 stories of residential apartments set just below the existing roof. And at first floor, we're proposing the residents to benefit from electric car parking. Each apartment in Len House will have its own winter garden, and they will benefit from the solar panels that are set within the green roof. Also proposing to restore the willow trees that will line the bank of the river. On the ground floor, we would like to create a food hall, bringing local farm produce and creating a destination restaurant for the town. The whole development will create a total of 159 new homes with a good mix of 1, 2 and 3 bedroom apartments. And in addition to the food hall, we'll be creating retail and co-working spaces on the ground floor. And most importantly, a new public square where we'll reconstruct the old pumping station. And thus, this will revive this iconic modernist building for the town.
Thank you very much. That was Right, we have a number of members who've wished to speak. This is my ward, but because of his engagement with this process, I'm actually going to ask Councillor Harwood to speak first. Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. I think that there is a real balance that we need to consider as a committee on this, that we are looking to rehabilitate the iconic building, and I think actually in design terms a lot of the work is really very good. However, it's not without a cost. As been mentioned, there's 159 residential units coming in there. They're very close to the back of Bank Street, where the nighttime economy is very important. And I think some of the issues around, can you prevent the complaints around reverberation and noise and so on, is going to be a significant issue, I think, especially for you, Chairman, in years ahead with the balancing, another balancing issue there. We know that there has to be enabling development to allow the rehabilitation and refurbishment of the building. We just need to be sure that the level of that change is appropriate. And I think just it is. I think the roof development and so on, it will change the look of the building, but I think the architect has been successful in that. My key concern, however, relates to, I think, the other iconic feature of Maidstone Town Centre, which is the River Len. And you saw in the opening image, you saw the reflection of the Roots building in the mill pond. But now we have a proposal for a boardwalk which will be attached to the building, which would kind of impact on some of that symmetry. It would also impact on the biodiversity of a very important and biodiverse river. I mean, as you're aware, this year on the island we had mute swans nesting, we had mallards, and we had moorhen. I suggest that when we get the noise and the disturbance and the lighting and the things being thrown into the river and so on, that we're going to get with bringing a walkway right past, projecting over the river that we own and so on, is going to be an issue. So I think that there's a biodiversity trade-off and a kind of net disbenefit for the environment. So we're looking at the other balancing act, and the other one was that both the 1993 and the 2000 local plan had key policies to enable the daylighting, as it's called now, but tearing the town's rivers from out under the concrete shrouds. A lot of them went under, particularly in the late 70s and 80s. And one really essential part of that jigsaw was the River Len in Palace Avenue, which is probably the most prominent stretch of the River Len, where it flows from the Stone Street Club, and then it used to flow along the side of Palace Avenue opposite the police station in a very prominent location. It got covered in concrete to provide additional car parking. I think the quid pro quo of this development is that we need to bring the river back to the town, and we just need to look at some of the work that's been done in other Kent towns. In Dartford, when the GlaxoSmithKline plant was refurbished and regenerated, when you look at Ashford and the very significant works, the River Darren in Dartford and the river and the Stour in Ashford was daylighted. Here we are seeing a proposal that it won't be. They're talking about a reel with a pump, which I think will only mash up the local eel population and is probably against laws. I actually think that we need to daylight that stretch of river. I don't necessarily think the developer needs to pay for it. I suggest that through the Environment Agency, through DEFRA, through other funding streams, and through Section 106 from other developments in the town centre, we can tear the concrete shroud off of this stretch of the River Len. However, I do not think that the urgent update and having a talking shop or a member working group or whatever it's called will do the job. What I think is that we need that stretch of land on the frontage of Palace Avenue signed over to Maidstone Borough Council so that we can find the money through whatever reason, and then we can do it properly, just as they're doing with the River Trent in Stoke at the moment. So I suggest that what we need to do is to defer a decision on this application, because the River Len is so fundamental, for discussions to look at a Section 106 to achieve probably a land transfer for that stretch of the River Len, so that in time we can achieve its refurbishment. I'm also very struck that this application was quite condition light on the papers until we had very, recently, a very long urgent update that I certainly haven't had the time because of work to fully digest and understand. So I think a deferral for a cycle, that's just until the meeting at, I think, the 24th of July, at the end of July, then we can make a decision with everything at our fingertips in terms of being able to look at those long list of conditions and to fully understand the Section 106 repercussions and approach we could take. So I would like to move deferral, and also I'd like the officers to come back, because I know Mr. Jarman may have some thoughts on that. Thank you.
Before you finish, Tony, I'd like to ask the officer how long it would take to get a noise assessment done, because I'd like to make an informed decision on whether or not the noise mitigation can actually be delivered.
Chair,
How long will it take to do, Austin?
The key factor would be the phasing of the government's willingness to allow those businesses to return to their previous level of activity. At the moment, they've been closed for some months.
So we can't measure it, yes, of course.
And under the openings which will start this weekend, obviously there are going to be significant capacity reductions in all venues, and therefore it's unlikely that even from this weekend, the noise levels would be typical of those that were experienced before lockdown. So that is why we suggest a pre-commencement condition that a further noise survey with specific regard to those uses be undertaken prior to any development commencing.
That's all right. There's no need to go any further. I just wanted to know whether we were in a position, if we're going to have a deferral, to get any further information on that. But it doesn't seem that we would be. This is my ward. I think that I have always felt that this is a fine building. One or two members of this council have not shared this view, but I think this is a fine example of a relatively rare type of listed building. There are not many buildings of this particular type in the UK, let alone around the world, not even in the world as a whole. So it needs to be saved. Having said that, I have reservations, as you probably just gathered, on the noise issue. I am also not particularly keen on the details of the actual forecourt square. I think that could actually be improved upon. But the nub of the issue, as Councillor Harwood said, is biodiversity. I don't think you have to go as far as that far away distant town of Ashford, which has been very good in this respect. You actually have to go to the other side of Maidstone and the town centre and actually look at the works that were done as a result of the Sainsbury's extension. The ecological benefits to the Len Valley Nature Reserve, which this council was instrumental in setting up, and Tony and myself were involved in, has been substantial as a result of deculverting, if that's the correct word. And I find it very difficult to accept the argument that this would be a negative in biodiversity terms. I don't think it is. There is possibility that the boardwalk would have not a beneficial effect, so that the works on the mill pond would at best be neutral. So I think we actually do need to secure a balance in biodiversity gain from this site. And that is, after all, the thrust of government policy at the moment in the NPPF and in other documentation and legislation that's coming forward. With that said, the mechanism is going to be quite complicated. We've had a lot of discussion in the last week. We had a substantial urgent update, which members have not had an opportunity to read. Therefore, I think we need to actually think about the mechanism. It is quite possible that we, as a council, should actually look at doing the main work here and getting the developer to make a proportional contribution rather than expecting them to have to pay for all of it. So I think a deferral might be the wisest thing. I'm going to ask if Mr. Jarman has anything to add at this point. Mr. Jarman, are you there?
I am indeed, Chairman, and good evening, members. Yes, I think the way forward would be a specific deferral with regard to a Section 106 agreement, perhaps incorporating the transfer of land to Maidstone Borough Council, as was the case with the Sainsbury's development, as was the case on many of the Riverside developments along Hart Street. Secondly, I do think that whilst I think in broad terms the architecture is pretty good, but we need to pin down the applicant to make sure that those finer details are actually executed. So we need time to rework the conditions. And the reworking of the conditions, which I appreciate you've only seen this afternoon for the first time, would include the forecourt, as you mentioned, Chairman, noise, open space, and in particular, the details, not just of the listed building, but of the new build, which obviously affects its setting. Thank you.
I have a lot of members wishing to speak, but can I hear members who would, anyone who would particularly object to deferring this application at this stage? Because I think if we're going to vote to defer it, I don't think I want a substantive debate this evening if we're coming back again. So can I have any questions or objections to defer? Councillor Atkinson, you said you've got a comment. Is it particularly on this point? Councillor Atkinson?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just Councillor Harwood was talking about the boardwalk and how it affects the ecosystem there. I kind of agree with him. So I was just wondering, how much was the boardwalk going to cost? And if they don't put the boardwalk in, could the cost of that be used for the daylighting of the culvert? So we might get some costings so we could make some sort of comparison.
Well, we can ask the question as part of the deferral if members want. Can I have any... Right, unless I see anyone really objecting or adding anything, I'm going to move forward. Councillor Harwood, you did have a point on noise, I think, which it might be relevant at this point. Tony?
Yeah. Louise has asked to come in very quickly on something.
Louise can come in just after you, but if
right.
you...
Yeah, the point about noise is that I do know that on New Year's Eve, when banks utilised the marquee for the New Year's Eve party there,
I did, yeah.
NBC did take some sound recording there. So in the archives, we may well have exactly the data of Banks Garden in use that we're seeking. So,
okay, it's worth asking that. Councillor Bryce, and then I'm going to see whether we can defer or not. Councillor Bryce?
Yeah, it was just, if you're going to defer and look at the boardwalk, I agree with what Councillor Atkinson and Councillor Harwood has said. It's the open nature of it that concerns me. So somebody could walk in, even when the retail area is shut, walk along that boardwalk, and it's going to be relatively dark, isn't it, on that lower level? And I just think there's a bit of a health and safety concern there, because it's going to be unlit,
Well, unfortunately, yeah. I think that...
Anyway, I think that just needs a bit of consideration, the open nature of it. It just doesn't seem to hang together for me.
Yeah, I think if you don't have any problem, Mr. Mackey or Mr. Jarman, I think we will we would probably just want to have a brief cast our eye over the boardwalk issue at the same as part of the package of looking at the biodiversity of that mill pond and the deculverting at the same time. Would that be a problem to you, Mr. Jarman or Mr. Mackey? Rob first, please.
Yeah, as I said, Chairman, we need to rework the conditions and bring them back. And one of the conditions
condition relating
would be with regard to the boardwalk, the detail of it. Yeah.
Okay, fine. That's great. We can do that. Mr. Mackey, are you happy with that?
Yes, Chair. Just to clarify on the noise, I was quickly looking at the case notes. The applicant, despite what I said, did in fact carry out noise surveys during the operation of the clubs. It is the objectors that have suggested that they haven't modelled that into a clear solution. So we have the data. The outstanding action will be to come forward with a mitigation scheme, which is what the condition could require.
Okay, but in that case, I am now going to move, because we don't want to have the whole discussion. Sorry, it's already been moved. I second that we defer to clarify the conditions and potential 106, taking on board the issues that have been outlined by Tony Harwood, myself, and Mr. Jarman, and we come back when we've reworked the conditions and looked into the section 106. Does anyone need any further clarification?
Chairman, just to clarify, I believe that Councillor Mumford actually seconded the proposal quite a lot earlier on. So whether or not he wishes to come back or not.
If so, I assumed he was actually seconding a comment. Okay, Councillor Mumford.
No, I was seconding the proposal.
Okay, my apologies. It was slightly ambiguously phrased, but so noted that you were.
Okay, but no, I've got nothing further to add.
Okay, this is the vote on to defer the planning application. Obviously, I'll come to the listed building consent in a moment. Can I take a vote on that? Alphabetically, please, Mr. O'Connell, because this is an important application.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Atkinson?
4.
Councillor Bryce?
4.
Councillor Brindle?
4.
Councillor Chapel-Tay?
If you can't speak, can you IM it, Karen?
Councillor English?
Agree, 4. And Karen, Councillor Chapel-Tay has voted for.
Thank you. Councillor Harwood?
4.
Councillor Cummins?
4.
Councillor Munford?
4.
Councillor Perry?
4.
Councillor Spooner?
4.
Councillor Vizard?
4.
Councillor Wilby?
4.
And Councillor Young?
4.
That concludes the voting. Thank you, Chairman.
Mrs. Snook, I think that was
Chairman, that was unanimous. Yes,
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. We now move on to listed building consent, where we obviously have to vote again. Councillor Harwood, are you moving deferral?
I am indeed.
Councillor Mumford, are you seconding that?
Yes, I am.
In that case, Mr. O'Connell, would you call the vote again, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Atkinson?
4.
Councillor Bryce?
4.
Councillor Brindle?
4.
Councillor Chapel-Tay?
4.
Councillor English?
4.
Councillor Harwood?
4.
Councillor Kimmins?
4.
Councillor Mumford?
4.
Councillor Perry?
4.
Councillor Spooner?
4.
Councillor Vizard? Councillor Vizard?
Excuse me, I was coughing. 4.
Councillor Wilby?
4.
And Councillor Young?
4.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Mrs. Snook, what was the total?
That was unanimous, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. All right. So we move on now to item 11, I believe, on page 62, Little Spitzbrook Farm, Hawker Street, Collier Street, Kent, and I ask the officer to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I just get confirmation from members that they can see my screen?
We can indeed.
Thank you very much, members. Just to couple of items to update. Just refer members to the urgent update items that members have received. You've also received quite a number of well, 2 specific emails from the agent in terms of lobbying material. So I'm not going to go into those details or what's contained within that information at this stage, but one of those emails is quite relevant depending what the decision is reached at tonight. So we might have to sort of go back and revisit one of those emails depending on what the decision is. I'd just like to add something to the report at 6.23 of the report. I think this will be addressed by our second speaker tonight, Mr. Davis, because obviously in 6.23 there's quite a lot of screening around the boundaries of the site. There was when I went and did my site visit, but obviously I received an email from, I think it's from Mr. Davis quite recently, saying that screening has been removed, therefore on the boundary of his property and on the property of 1 and 2 Haviaker Street. So on that basis, I actually haven't seen that screening removed, but what it suggests to me is that the building becomes more visible from the road. So I'm sure that will come out in any comments from the objector. I just think it's important that I correct something that's set out in the report, because it was like that when I wrote the report and has subsequently changed. So really just turning to the presentation now. In terms of what we've got, this is the site location plan. So you've got the building here. The curtilage is relatively small curtilage. This is an existing patio area and it stops here. So this is the planning unit. There is a much larger field to the back, which does not form part of the planning unit, that you'll see in the photographs later. This is just an aerial photograph. That's the area of field that I'm referring to. So that's not within the application, i.e. the planning unit of this application. It effectively runs through the access, down the side and curtails along here. So this is the existing building on the site. The 2 buildings with the big arrows are 1 and 2 Haviaker Street and 3 and 4 Haviaker Street. Both those 2 buildings are listed buildings, and I think this is the screening that I've referred to that may have been removed recently by the applicant. My understanding it was on their property. So this just gives you a context of the site. So this is Little Sprixbrook Barn to the right hand side. This is not listed, and the access into the site is down here, with the 2 listed buildings off shot here and off to the right hand side over here off screen. So this is one pair of the listed buildings, numbers 3 and 4 Haviaker Street. And this is looking the access leading down into the site, and it's those I think that have been removed. If you look at the screen, it's those and these ones that have been possibly removed. So we're moving into the access into the site. This is the existing building. So moving around the building. This is the back. So obviously this is not part of the planning unit, and this is part of the planning unit over here. This is the application boundary which extends down here. Members will know in terms of this was a balcony area that wasn't shown on the prior approval of plan. Just shows it in more context. The applicant, as part of this scheme, proposes to replace this cement weatherboarding with an ebony or dark stained timber boarding, which sets out in the report that is quite a significant improvement to the building. And obviously, as part of the proposals, this would be removed. This balcony area would be removed, and there'll be a continuation of the existing roof form over this area. That's just looking to the area that's not part of the application site. And then it's looking down to the side where you've got your heat exchange units here, air conditioning units, and you've got your store area off here. And this was the area of trees that I think we referred to that may have been removed, which opens up that view in terms of the road. So This is the existing building. Obviously, the applicant has submitted this application on the basis that this is a change of use application. It is set out in the report, and I'll go into later that officers disagree with that description, but this is the building that the applicant is seeking, saying is the change of use of. This is a copy of a photograph of the building that effectively that building is. Moving through in terms of just to familiarise members with some of the applications, this was the prior approval plan. It is set out in your papers. I appreciate the fact it's rather small to see. It's set out on paragraphs 2.05 of the report. This is the as-built building, so that's the building that you've just seen on site, and that's set out again on paragraph 2.06 of your report. So this was the application, one of the applications that was effectively refused planning permission, and that's contained in Appendix 1 of the papers tonight. This is a plan just to show the difference between the prior approval and as proposed plan. So the red shows the prior approval, and effectively that's superimposed on the the proposed elevations of the building with the changes that have been incorporated. And mainly they relate to changes to kind of the front, to the opposite end onto this side over here, to the back where there previously was that balcony area, and there's obviously changes to fenestration around the building, and these are set out in further detail in Appendix 2. Unfortunately, it's referred to as J, but actually that is the Appendix 2 which I refer to in the back of the reports. This is just the wood store building. So this is what I've referred to that is included already in your papers. This effectively sets out the changes that are proposed as part of this application to the as-built building. So in terms of turning to the assessment, members will recall at the meeting on the 14th of March 2019, the two applications which are attached as Appendix 1 to your reports were refused on the grounds cited in paragraph 6.02 of your current papers. These two applications are currently being appealed, with the appeal process held in abeyance pending the outcome of the current application. At the meeting of the 14th of March, and recorded in the minute under the heading Note, it was stated that following determination of these applications, reference was made by the chairman to the desire on the part of members for further discussions to seek to achieve a solution to the situation that has arisen. Those discussions were carried forward by officers who have now left the council, but essentially those discussions and the discussions of members in the March 2019 meeting centred around seeking a similar appearance to the prior approval scheme. The current scheme that has been submitted and is now before members is the result of those discussions, and the applicant's desire to bring this matter to a close by seeking the alterations to the current building as built to incorporate those changes as I've previously set out, which are now contained in Appendix 2 of this report. However, and notwithstanding the above, the application still needs to be assessed against the criteria set out by Section 38(6) of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act, in that decisions must be made in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. Relevant to members' consideration of the application tonight is the previous grounds of refusal, with ground 1 citing, given the extent of the demolition and rebuilding works which have been carried out to the original agricultural barn building on the site, and the limited amount of the original structure that has been retained in the new dwelling, the council are of the view that the development represents a new build dwelling in the open countryside location. As set out by case law, members will have to have due regard to the importance of consistency in the decision-making process. That does not mean that they are bound to follow the previous decision, But if they depart from that, which your officers consider are material given the specifics of the previous grounds of refusal, then members must give clear reasons for doing so and have had due regard to the importance of consistency. And that is effectively the case law stance. The report sets out the disagreement between the applicant and your officers on the description of the development. The agent confirms that his application is for a change of use of an agricultural barn to a single dwelling, whereas of your officer's view is that, as previously set out and confirmed by the previous ground of refusal, that this is a new build dwelling in the countryside. The report concludes that with regards to whether the principle is established that a new build dwelling is acceptable in this countryside location, that there is no such policy support for this, and the proposals would be contrary to policies SS1, SP17 and DM30 of the local plan. With regard to whether the conversion policy, and that's policies DM31, applies to this application, the applicant considers that it does, and that the current proposals are in accordance with the requirements of the policy. Your officers disagree, as set out in paragraphs 6.14 to 26.22 of the report. And this view is also supported by the previous grounds of refusal for the last applications. Even if members did consider that policy DM31 applied, for the reasons set out in the report, the current scheme does not accord with this policy. With regards to visual impact, your officers consider that due to its large scale, design and appearance, it is out of scale and character with the other properties in Havica Street and is therefore contrary to policies which seek protection of the countryside character. The report does, however, acknowledge that the changes now proposed are an improvement on the as-built building, and the lobbying material that was submitted to members does set out a time frame for building and the costings for those building works. Regarding the matters on the setting of the listed building and flooding, as set out by the previous refused applications and the reasons for refusal, these matters have not been addressed by the current submission and remain as relevant to the current submission as they did to the previously refused applications. Again, members have received lobbying material in terms of what was submitted in terms of to deal with the appeal matters. As to whether a fallback position is available to the applicant, having regard to recent case law, your officer's view, based on the previous grounds of refusal, is that there is no fallback position available, as the proposals represent a new build dwelling in the countryside. So summing up, overall, and whilst it is acknowledged that the applicant has gone some way to improve the overall appearance of the building in the current submission from what has been constructed on site, the current proposals are considered contrary to the development plan policies on the grounds set out in the recommendation section of this report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. For that, we have three speakers on this. Mr. Davis, an objector, who submitted a statement, Mrs. Cox, the applicant, with a video, and the incomparable Councillor David Burton, who is here as a visiting member. So we go first to a brief statement from Mr. Davis, the objector. Dear sirs, comments in regard to Little Spitzbrook Barn, Havica Street. The building is an entirely new build with a dominating visual appearance, not in keeping with the Grade 2 listed buildings adjacent. The new building is much larger than the previous structure that it replaced. Photographs are with NBC planning. The building overshadows the gardens to the south and west elevations. A loss of privacy has built to windows in the west elevation overlook the adjacent property. Raising the proposed entranceway and the finished drive levels will severely impact on the neighbouring properties in the event of flooding. The environmental agency stated that this should not be permitted. The photographs taken from Havica Street show the property and its visual impact on the area. Mark Davis, objector. And we have, I hope, a video from the applicant, Mrs. Cox.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just going to wait until Mr. Bailey stops sharing so that I can share my screen. 2
Yes.
seconds. Just bear with me. Hopefully he's going to stop sharing. Thank you, Mr.
Oh,
Bailey. You're a
excellent.
star. Thank you. Excellent. Bear with me, members. Hopefully you can see that, Chairman.
Not at the moment, but it's
Give it a moment.
loading now. There
Excellent.
we go.
Here we
There
go.
we go.
Thank you, members.
Last March, this committee went on record to say that there had been a failure in process by the planning team. We are sure that the committee has and will recognise that any failure to follow the planning process is a very serious issue. Right now, we are the victims of those failures and to date have spent nearly 150,000 trying to ensure that common sense, reasonableness and proportionality win the day. The summary report for this application says that the building should be viewed as a new build. In March 2019, that summary report accepted that the committee had the choice to regard it as a conversion, and it made provisions for that choice. We have serious concerns about the current summary report in that it contains misleading and inaccurate allegations, which, as they have been published unchallenged, may lead readers to assume that they should be regarded as accurate. The building works approved in 2015 were defined by Mr. Jarman and the planning officer as a conversion. We have a letter from Alan Baxter Partnership which states their expert opinion that the structure of the as-built conforms to those plans. Any reasonable person, therefore, would conclude that we have a structure that the council has previously approved as a conversion. Last March, this committee asked the planning department and us to work together to find a workable solution. We have accepted every single recommendation proposed by the planning officers. I am able to quote from an email from Graham Parkinson, the case planning officer. It looks to me that John Barnes' email to you properly identifies those amendments required to overcome the planning committee's design and size objections to the building that has been erected. Subsequently, Mr. Bailey was asked directly to engage in the process that the committee requested. He refused to do so. In summary, we have a structure defined by the Head of Planning Services in 2015 as a conversion and not a new build. We have expert opinion that the as-built conforms to the structure of the approved. As requested, we have incorporated all of the recommendations from
Sorry about that, Chairman. I'm not sure what's happened there. I think she was just about coming to the end, actually, Chairman. So I think you might want to just read her last couple of lines because it was approaching the 3-minute mark. Can you hear me, Chairman?
Sorry, I had a slight problem there myself, but I'm back on now. So, yes, in conclusion, she was saying that your own council leader, Martin Cox, has said to us that if the building built represents no loss of amenity to the neighbourhood when compared to the approved, then the council has better things to do, which time and money and better cases to fight. We're prepared to withdraw the appeal currently listed for hearing if we receive a favourable decision, and we put our faith in the honesty and the integrity of this committee to recognise what is at stake and approve the application, having incorporated all the recommendations of the committee and the planning officer previously brought forward. Right, and that brings us to Councillor Burton, who is here as David Burton, that is, of course, as a visiting member.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I need to respond to something there in so much as I am informed that the screening trees were on the neighbouring properties and removed by the neighbours.
Right.
The applicant further indicates they would be prepared to put new screening in place. I also think we should reiterate that, as that plan in front of us, I think shows that this application is not larger than the original barn. And I'm going to start with referring to that at section 6.12 in the report.
This says the size and massing of the building is wholly out of scale and character. Well, if that is the case, then so was the barn upon which the prior approval was granted in 2015. The second matter I would highlight in the report at 6.03, that you, Chairman, instructed on behalf of the committee that you desired further discussions to find a solution, to seek a solution to the situation that has arisen. I mean, I think as the applicant just indicated, latterly, I've not seen any evidence that really that has been the case. And so I'm perturbed as to why no solution appears to have been found in this case, and the officer's recommendation is refusal. Whilst recognising matters such as this can take time and the present difficulties with COVID-19, I have to say there seems to be something profoundly wrong putting the applicants through the tortuous ordeal that they've been faced with. I think I explained to you on a previous occasion that I have actually visited this property myself, and I have viewed firsthand the extent of the original structure, which remains integral to the building. And from what I could establish, the entirety of the original structure seemed to be there. I really do hope that this evening you will be able to recognise this as the conversion that it really is, and the one that, you know, prior approval was granted for in 2015. But I am going to go further and put something to you all, in so much as if you're not minded to support this application, that you would actually take back the responsibility for any enforcement action that may actually be instructed. And I think there was a recent example where you as a committee actually were asked to take the responsibility for enforcement decisions. So, you know, should it not be favourable this evening, I would ask that you would actually instruct that further action, if it is necessary, comes back to you for approval. And I do appreciate your time for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. Right, who have we got indicating wishing to speak? Just before I go on, Councillor Harwood has left the meeting and probably won't be returning on this item because he's working. So that brings us to Councillor Perry, I think. Councillor Perry.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I've got to say, I've read this time and time again, and I read, you know, this has been around a long time, and I really struggle with this one. But we are where we are. We are where we are, if you like. And I think the word proportionality was mentioned, and I think this is quite important, this whole affair, because it seems to me it has prior approval. The original structure which we're looking at is not exactly a terribly pleasant structure, but the new structure, as I understand it, does have the same footprint as this one. So it does seem to me actually the new structure, whatever you call it, that for me I'm not that interested in actually. It's an improvement on what you've got here that we're looking at. So I don't buy that it's damaging to the visual appearance. I mean, the whole of the Weald is full of small listed cottages sitting next door to larger buildings. I don't think actually it's a particularly big issue in my area I live in. I'll give you dozens of examples of that. The flooding issue I found a bit strange, because when I read the report, it did say that the Environment Agency was okay with it, provided there were certain conditions. I mean, I know all about living in a graded 3 area because I live in one myself. So I don't really buy that either. But the big issue for me in all of this, the one that really worries me, is the enforcement. Because what are we actually saying? If we refuse this, then what are we actually saying? Bring in the bulldozers? Is that what we're saying? Because that seems to me totally wrong as well. So, I think we need to think about this very carefully and try and find a resolution to it, because clearly the applicants have been trying to find a resolution, and I think that's what we need to find, because this needs to be resolved sensibly, it seems to me. I'll stick there, but I've got, as I said, loads of issues and questions on this. Thank you, Chairman.
Members, whilst it is understandable in this particular case to sort of think about the enforcement issues, they are, of course, two separate decisions, and the threshold and tests are two different sets of thresholds and tests. So we will be in danger of making a decision which could be considered inappropriate if we actually get ahead of ourselves. I understand where members are coming from on in terms of what Councillor Burton and others said, and I don't entirely disagree with them, but given the policy issues and the need to be consistent and not precedent but consistency, and you have to bear in mind the unintended consequences of our actions, I think we need to be very, very clear if there is an overturn and an approval of a recommendation, why members feel that that should be done. Because if we just say, oh, it's all right, there are houses like this all over the Weald, well, there certainly will be, because we will open a barn door, to use the phrase, very, very wide open. So we have to identify very clearly, if we are going to grant this, why we think that on balance that is the right thing to do, rather than just say, well, that's okay. So I'll leave you to think about that along with other members and move on to Councillor Wilby. And I have Councillor Chapel-Tay after that. Councillor Wilby.
Just a few questions. The applicant made reference to one of the officers, James Bailey, about refusing to take part. One of my questions is about did he actually refuse? But the actually hearing the visiting member and looking at his report and hearing the applicant, there seems to be a willingness to work together. I know we instructed them. I was on the planning committee last year when this came to us, and we did say about going to work with the applicant, and they seem to be almost there from my thought. So rather than going to a huge discussion, and if they're willing to take more tree planting, just deferred one item. Shall we defer it? Is get the people into work with the officers, and the officers to work with these people, and get this back in a workable manner, because it doesn't seem that far off to me.
I think we need to hang on a moment. We need to be a little clearer, Paul, at least, as to the grounds of what you actually are seeking to secure from the deferral, if you don't mind me saying so. I'll come back to you in a minute whilst you've thought about that, and I'll go on to Karen Chapel-Tay.
It seems to me that this hinges around two central questions. Firstly, is it a new build or a conversion? And then what exactly is a conversion? And I think that for a conversion, I did check some of the case law on this, a conversion does allow a reasonable amount of demolition and rebuilding, but it doesn't allow you to knock the whole thing down completely and start from scratch. So I think the question then is, would we have allowed a new build here? No, absolutely not. I don't think there's any question about that. And then, is this a conversion? And I sympathise with the applicants, but I can't see any way of convincing myself that this is actually a conversion rather than a new build. It is substantially different in many ways, and it's been a complete demolition and complete rebuild. Unfortunately, therefore, I think I would have to go with the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Chapel-Tay. I'm going to take Councillor Bryce, and then Councillor Perry has indicated he wants to come back. So, Councillor Bryce.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I'm subbing tonight, so maybe I'm planning catch up. So the original application was this refused because there's a very similar. I'm just trying to look back at the planning history. So was a scheme like this, which is very similar, was that refused or passed?
We refused the application and essentially took the view as part of that refusal that it wasn't a conversion.
Yeah.
So to overcome that ground of refusal, we would essentially have to say why our original decision was wrong.
So just to be clear then.
To overcome that ground.
Yeah, so the applicant put in an application that was very similar to the thing that's now built. We refused it, and then they've gone ahead and built it anyway and said, oh no, it's not like the planning permission we put in, it's actually a conversion. It just looks very similar to the thing that we put in initially. And now we're saying, okay, well, we refused it, but we should approve it because they've gone ahead and built it. Is that a biased summary or fair summary, do you think?
Well, procedurally it's correct. I mean, I think,
Okay, so okay, that clarifies things for me. Thanks.
Yeah.
Apologies if I'm asking obvious questions. It's just
no, Councillor Price, you weren't involved in the original process. It's quite fair to ask the question.
Okay, great.
Councillor Perry. Councillor Perry? Oh, you want to speak later, Brooke. Okay,
I'm here. Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I just wanted to quickly come back. Yeah, I mean, we do build in rural areas. Excuse me. We do build in rural areas. I mean, it's not unknown. I've sat on this committee and passed some builds in rural areas. So the fact that even if it is classified as a new build, it doesn't preclude it from being built. And I'm just looking at what was there and what is there now. And quite frankly, I think it looks a lot better what's there now. But that's just a personal view. And a lot of this seems to be very subjective. There's a whole list of reasons why we should refuse. I can see that, and I accept that's one way of looking at it. But I think you could equally turn them all around, quite frankly. So I'm with Councillor Wilby on this one. If we can, because I think it needs another look, and I think we are where we are, as I said before. And the idea of refusing, I know you're saying enforcement can't be considered. Yes, but that will be what will happen if we refuse. So there is a link, and I understand where you're going to come from, but there is a link, and we're kidding ourselves if there isn't. So we need to think about that. So I'm with Councillor Wilby on this one. I think we need to give the applicants a chance with the officers to get a solution for this. Then we can resolve it, because at the moment it seems to me we're not going anywhere. Thank you.
With Councillor Perry, I'm not against having a deferral, but I think you and anyone else who wants a deferral just needs to be a bit more specific about what you're actually seeking, because otherwise we could end up here in another 6 months' time, if you see what I mean. Right, Councillor Brindle, and then I'm taking Mr. Bailey. Councillor Brindle, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah,
I'm here, thank you.
Good.
Mr. Davies, the objector,
Yeah.
made comment. I'm sure I heard him say something about the height and the bulk of it. Is it possible you could please tell me that the height of the old barn as compared with the height of the newly built one, given that we agree it's on the same footprint? Thank you.
Right, I'm going to take Councillor Spooner, and then I'm going to Mr. Bailey. Councillor Spooner. Hello, Dennis, you with us?
Yeah, I'm still with you. Yes.
Good. Yes. Excellent. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I understand this situation, the original building was granted consent for a conversion, but they ended up actually doing a complete rebuild. Therefore, I would have thought in pure planning terms, what is there now is unlawful. And correct. I think, as James Bailey is saying, you cannot now convert or grant permission to something which is there unlawfully in the first place. And I think we have to think to ourselves, had this been a greenfield site, would we have granted permission for a new dwelling on that land? No, we would not have done. The permission was only granted because it was a conversion. And if that conversion has been unlawfully done, I fail to see how we can now approve it. that is my view. So I share Councillor Chapel-Kay's views, and I support the officers on this particular case. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Right, Mr. Bailey.
Lots of matters raised that I feel I need to sort of address as part of that. Maybe if I could first start, I'll come back to Councillor Brindle's, because on members' screen you will see what the applicant has submitted as measurements. I'll come back to that in a minute. I do just think, first of all, I totally accept that this is a difficult decision that members have to take in this basis, but I'm here to advise members of an officer view, and whatever view you take, that a decision must be made in accordance with the development plan. So if members, they can depart from the previous decision. I haven't said that they cannot, but what members must do is, because when you look at those previous grounds of refusal in 6.02, that established in that ground a principal matter. It didn't say about the fabric of the building. It said, when members assessed the application, that given the extent of the demolition and rebuilding works which have been carried out to the original building on the site, and the limited amount of original structure that's been retained in the new dwelling, the council are of the view that this is a new build dwelling. So with that in mind, obviously this application in front of you has the same footprint as members previously refused that application. What has occurred as a result of this application is all those changes that are set out in Class J. Now, members can, quite rightly, deviate from that previous ground of refusal. They can deviate it. All I'm saying is that members will need to give very clear reasons as to why, given that that ground was a principal ground. It didn't say about the height and everything else. That said about the extent of demolition. So it started about the principal elements, and the building that's being proposed is going to be that building currently on site that will be altered. So I just think that needs to be, so if members do want to go against officer view, they're perfectly entitled to do that. They just need to set out clearly why either that ground is being addressed, and then in terms of consistency, and the chairman's picked that up as being right, it's a consistency point because that was a principal matter which is not changing as part of this building. So if members do want to approve for consistency, they've just got to clearly set out as to why they're reaching a different conclusion on consistency based on that point. With regard to Councillor Wilby's, did I work with the applicant? Well, as I said, there were two previous officers, Mr. Barnes, who wrote the original report, and Mr. Parkinson, who did work with the applicant. I've picked this application up as a subsequent of those two individuals leaving the council. And as set out in the report, those two officers did work with the applicants to bring that building as close as possible to what is in front of you. So, but as a professional officer of the council, I've got to give you a professional planning view, which might not always follow the view of members. And I have to give you a view based on the materiality of previous decisions and on policy issues. So I take those in the round. And yes, as a professional officer advising members, it is difficult if you come back to tell me, say, you want me to find a solution, and I've got to then give you a view which may differ from that, because clearly the ground of refusal you made set a principal matter, as I previously set out. So I can't, as an officer, come back to you and suddenly say, well, members, you can disregard that, because as an officer, I have to give that weight in terms of a consistency process. So hopefully that explains the position. I did instruct the officers to carry out your wishes, and what you've got in front of you is that wish. So I don't think it's probably right necessarily for members to defer this application, because what you've got in front of you is a result of what you requested, in effect. That's what you've got in front. So I don't know what deferment is going to achieve, because you've got that. You know, if members want to approve this application now, they can do.
Yes.
But so I don't think a deferment's going to sort of help in that respect. What am I going to, you know, I think the applicant has gone a long way. You've seen the lobbying material about the cost, the timing. I accept in the report, and they've gone above and beyond because we kind of raised the issue of, you know, replace the cladding. They've done that with a darker stained ebony stain, timber boarding. So, you know, and you see the costings, that's a big cost of their overall build proportion. So I accept the applicants have gone quite a long way to meeting what members discussed. But that doesn't mean that me as a professional officer can then suddenly turn around and say, I feel that that's acceptable, because what I have to then do is look at the previous grounds and look at the policy. And if this is a conversion, and if you're saying it's a conversion, which obviously I don't agree with, then you've got to assess that under policy DM31. And DM31, as set out in your report, is not met in part of the consideration that I've set out in these papers, which effectively looks at the conversion policy from 6.14 onwards. So I did try to set that out for you in case members wanted to, you know, whilst I clearly say, and given the previous ground of refusal, you say that it's not a conversion, it's a new build. I've tried to give the benefit of the doubt by saying, you know, the applicant's applying for conversion, the applicant believes DM31 applies. So I've tried to give that benefit in the report by saying, members, this is the assessment under DM31. So with regard to, I think that's answered most of the questions. I'm just trying to Councillor Brindle's. These are the dimensions that have been supplied, which were taken off plan form and have been submitted as part and parcel of this application. So you've got the agent's measurements for the council's prior approval. It didn't have a ridge height. You've got it separately checked. IM measurements were taken from a plan of 6.79. Then you've got effectively the differences between the building that now's on site. And effectively that's what comes out that's in front of you is the difference. And where I address this in the report, the measurements sort of don't all tally up with each other. There isn't one measurement that's consistent throughout the whole frame. And I don't really want to go down the route of explaining to members, you know, what happened with the existing building and what was attached to the existing structure frame, because, you know, effectively what your officers have set out in the previous reports is that, you know, by virtue of the extent of the amount of works that were carried out, that's why we considered that it wasn't a conversion, a rebuild. But it's up to you tonight to make that decision as to whether.
I think we need to move on. Right, with some dispatch. Councillor Wilby, did you want to come back very briefly on this? Because I see an icon here. Sorry. Are you able?
Yeah,
because you were a bit garbled there for a moment.
That's all right, Clive. It's just a question to the officer before I probably change my about deferring. In his eyes, is there any way that this can be made policy compliant? And if not, then I will second the proposer, or if Councillor Spooner has done it, I will back the thing to actually go with what's on the papers.
Mr. Bailey?
To answer that succinctly, the applicant thinks that this is compliant with DM31 and he sets that out in his report. I have set out in the report that I don't think it's policy compliant. What I have said, and that comes down to this matter of the fallback position, that if members consider that this is a conversion, then there is a fallback position available to the committee, and that's established through the doctrine of Mansell, Tunbridge and Morning and Mansell, as I've set out in my case, where members can conclude and take into weight what could have been done as part of the fallback position and assess what's on site now as this being a preferable position. Now, that is a position that members could take, and that was a position that was open to members on the previous applications as set out in Appendix 1. It's just a question of how members go around that point. But again, I draw my distinction that if members do go down that route, you've got to turn your mind to the consistency matter and then confirm, one, why you think that this decision is not related to the previous decision you made in the context that the building in effect is a very similar building, albeit with the changes as set out in Appendix 2 of your report. So hopefully that, I know it's quite complex, Councillor Wilby, I understand that, but I'm just trying to give members the option because, you know, quite rightly, if members do want to approve it, then I should kind of assist them as to what areas they need to look at if that's the route they wish to go down. Or they could turn around and say, actually, yes, it's a conversion and we think it complies with DM 31. That's something that they could say, but that might go at odds with your previous decision on consistency. So as long as you do that, members, then that's fine. And I can assist you as you go through that discussion.
Right. I think we're making heavy. Councillor Atkinson, I'm going to only take the people who already indicated unless they have something massively important to say. Councillor Atkinson and Councillor Kimantz will be after that because he hasn't spoken, and then Russell Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillors Chapeltain and Spooner. This is essentially a new build, so you know, we shouldn't be giving it permission at all. Also agree with James Bailey that deferment won't actually achieve anything. So I agree with the recommendation. But I'll just add, somewhere in the report, I can't immediately find it, there's a mention that Landel's been raised by 200 millimetres, contrary to the recommendations of the Environment Agency. So is there anything we can do about that? Thank you.
In due course, Councillor Kimantz, please.
Yeah, I'd like to ask the officer, does the original framework of the building still exist?
Mr. Bailey?
In parts, yes.
How much?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, Mr. Chairman. How much of the frame is still intact?
Well, it's been bolted onto, there's been a subframe, if you like, that's been put onto the existing frame to take the loadings that's come from the upper floors and the new roof, obviously, because it was a very lightweight building previously. So the existing frame, most of that existing frame does exist. Well, that's what the plans show, but it's had a kind of skeleton bolted onto the top of it.
So yeah, so my interpretation of that is like when you're converting a car, you can strip the whole body of the car right off, and you've still got the wheels and the subframe, and then you rebuild on top of that. So to me, yes, it is a conversion. That's how I stand.
Mr. Fitzpatrick, you get almost the last word.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of course, with the motor car, the frame is still the main part of the car with the wheels. This isn't just a case of just putting a new body on top of it. I've come to this without having any history behind it, and I found myself a little bit conflicted because the officers were put in a bit of a difficult position. The council has made a decision that this is a new build dwelling. They were then asked to go away and see whether or not they could rectify something which they can't do because it's a new build, and the only way that could be rectified is through the submission of a full application. Of course, James has mentioned the issue of consistency in decision making. So again, if you wish to go against that, you need to provide the reasons for that. The other thing is, of course, which hasn't been considered, is the precedent that this could potentially set. In principle, a grant of planning permission may set a precedent for further developments of the same character, and this is potentially material consideration. We know this, and that's old law which is telling us that. And in particular, where development is proposed in the Greenbelt, the grant of planning permission based on very special circumstances may create a precedent for future applications in the same area. So that's just something else which we need to bear in mind in this process, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzpatrick. I think I did very much at the beginning of this debate, so it's understandable if people, including your good self, have slightly overlooked it, because I didn't egg the point, was that we were opening a barn door, so to speak, potentially with the law of unintended consequences. And if we did permit this, and my view is that it is a new build, we would have to show very strong reasons why this is such a good application, or could be made such a good application, that it's okay in the open countryside, or better than okay, and actually has a beneficial impact. Or we would have to show good cause as to why our original decision that it wasn't a conversion was wrong, and could show reason why it is a conversion. I don't believe that on the facts of the case either have been demonstrated, and without either being demonstrated, we simply don't have grounds to overturn the recommendation. It's not just when you're refusing an application you need good grounds. It's when you're approving a recommendation against policy that you need good grounds too, and I don't think we've got them. Councillor Perry, I will allow you to ask the question you said you wanted to ask, as that's not actually a speech. Councillor Perry?
Yeah, it's just a question. I think it may have already been asked, but it's to James Bailey. Can we? Is there any chance we can rectify this? I just feel we're digging ourselves in a hole, and and I understand why, and I respect the views that have been expressed, but I feel we're in a hole, and that we need to try and find a way out of this. And is there a way out? I mean, could the applicant still do something that would allow this to go through, and get the blessing of the officers concerned? Because I'm really worried that if we go down the road of refusal, we're going to have some unintended consequences of this. And we do build in rural areas. Everybody seems to think we don't. We do put new builds in rural areas, and I actually live in a converted barn myself, so I know all about conversions as well.
Councillor Perry, yeah, I'll let you ask a
so
question.
right.
I wasn't going to.
Yeah, I'll ask the question, Chairman. Sorry.
Sorry.
I'll be succinct, Chairman. It is open to members to approve this application tonight, and that is a very clear matter. If members wish to go against the officer's recommendation, they are perfectly entitled to do that. All I'm saying is that members just need to bear in mind that they've considered the previous history, that in terms of consistency, and they clearly set out those reasons for why they're overturning that decision. So I think, Councillor Perry, that is entitled members to do that tonight. I don't think going away and trying to negotiate an improved position on a building that's there, it's a very difficult ask. If you're saying that, or the council have said that it's a new building, what can we do to make it important? I think the decision really rests with members to say, if they think it's a conversion, they can set that out, and set out all those reasons. I mean, I'm sorry to put this over to members, but this is a decision tonight for members to say, do they want to approve this scheme? Do they think it accords with the development plan policy or not? And that's really down to members. And as I said, I will assist you in the grounds where I can, just to make sure that we sort of cover as much as possible those areas for possible review, depending which way members go.
Right. Well, I think we're going to have to determine that. I'm going to put this to a vote in a moment, unless anyone has anything else to add that's very germane. I'm going to move, if it it has been moved and seconded, I think. Can I just confirm that refusal has been moved and seconded or not by Councillor Spooner? Councillor Spooner, did you move it? Mrs. Snoot, was it actually moved to be refused?
Chairman, I haven't got a note of a formal proposal to refuse or a seconder.
No. Councillor Spooner, were you going to
I'm quite happy to move that we refuse as on the order papers.
And Councillor Chapeltay has seconded that. I will just say that I'm going to put that to the vote. I will personally vote for it because I have heard no grounds to overturn the recommendation. Can I ask Mr. O'Connell to take up the roll call?
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Atkinson?
For.
Councillor Bryce?
For the refusal.
Councillor Brindle?
For.
Councillor Chapeltay?
For.
Councillor English?
For.
Councillor Kimmins?
Abstain.
Councillor Munford?
For.
Councillor Perry?
Against.
Councillor Spooner?
For.
Councillor Vizard?
For.
Councillor Wilby?
For.
Councillor Young?
Against.
Thank you. That concludes the voting.
Mrs. Snook, do we have a tally, please? Mrs. Snook, do you have a count?
Just doing the add ups, Chairman. So I've got 9 for, 2 against, and 1 abstention.
And be it noted, Councillor Harwood was not present for the vote. Right. Our next application is a Borough Council application, so therefore it will have to be briefly introduced, which is Maidstone Lawn Tennis Club, Poplar Grove, Maidstone.
Thank you, Chairman. This is the application. This is the Poplar Lane preschool just here. This is the additional patio area and the proposed new clubhouse. This is the existing clubhouse. Does certainly need to be replaced and made slightly larger in my view. This is the existing plans, and what you've got is this one, not significantly larger but it does create a larger, more usable DDA compliant building with a disabled toilet over this way, and it also does seek to provide a sort of an extended patio area which is enclosed by a security fence and hedging around the site. This is just an axonometric view of the building. In terms of policy, your officers consider it fully complies with local plan policy, which seek to support outdoor recreational use. It has marginal increased visual impact on the site, which is not discernible in the local context, and on that basis it is fully supported in my view by policy, and I would recommend the application for permission. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Does anyone want to speak to this? It's fairly straightforward. Councillor Vizard, is this in your neck of the woods?
No, it's not, Mr. Chairman. I don't.
Just checking. In that case, I'll formally move the recommendation. Is that seconded?
I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. All those in.
Chair, can I just speak? I did ask to speak.
Sorry, Councillor Atkinson, I don't have you. Oh, yes, it's coming slightly delayed. I've now just got it. Carry on.
Thanks. Just very quickly, I'm going to say the usual things about native species and bat swift and bee bricks, which is mentioned in here. So thank you very much.
I'm sure they'll appreciate a good view of the tennis. Is that a problem, Mr. Bailey? Hello?
Sorry, no, Chairman, I was on mute.
Right, you heard Councillor Atkinson wanting to incorporate the relevant biodiversity features in the building of our own tennis club, where appropriate.
Yes, I did hear that, Chairman, and I'll just request delegated powers to add additional condition on that basis.
Thank you. I'm quite happy to have that added in. Anyone else wish to add anything? If not, I will move to a vote. All those in favour of the recommendation, and would take it in alphabetical order, Mr. O'Connell.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Atkinson?
For.
Councillor Bryce?
For.
Councillor Brindle?
For.
Councillor Chapeltay?
For.
Councillor English?
For.
Councillor Kimmins?
For.
Councillor Munford?
For.
Councillor Perry?
For.
Councillor Spooner?
For.
Councillor Vizard?
For.
Councillor Wilby? And Councillor Young.
4.
Thank you,
Thank
Chairman.
you very much. Mrs. Snoot, was that unanimous?
That's unanimous, Chairman. Thank you.
That recommendation is approved, which is shocking given it was a borough council application and they're almost usually controversial. Sorry. We now move to the update on appeal decisions, which is a report for information only. Mr. Bailey, did you have anything to add to the information on the papers?
Just one on item 2, I think, in terms of whilst it was good that that was a member overturn on the decision, which was a good decision on terms of the committee. I would just add on that one, I think, because I remember the inspector did conclude that most of the matters were acceptable, but what led to the refusal was the insufficient survey due to the local nearby nature reserve, and therefore on that basis that obviously members may feel that one may come forward, because obviously it said that the inspector couldn't approve something without knowing if they were protected species or what the impact on that would be. So it's just a sort of a point of note, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good job we included that, I suppose, but I take your point. Any questions on that report, members? Otherwise, not a bad report again.
No.
Very good.
Very good.
Yep. Well, thank you very much, members and officers, and many members of the public who are still with us, for all of your contributions. It's not been an easy meeting over 2 nights, over 2 weeks, but we've made some hard decisions and we're still working on some. Thank you very much for all of your hard work and contributions in this somewhat unusual format. I do look forward to having real meetings and again at some point, but I say physical meetings, not real meetings. This is a real meeting. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your evening.